Hey everybody, this is Carlos. Thanks for joining us. On today's show, we're going to be speaking with Chris Gilbert of Gilbert Boas. Chris is a great boa breeder who focuses not only on boamorphs, but also on sand boas. We're going to talk about how he got involved in the hobby and his plans for the upcoming season. We're also going to talk about his work with the leopard and blood gene and how they're poised to be the next big thing in the hobby. Finally, we're going to talk about how spending a little bit of money on your boa setups can lead to increased breeding success. Boarackradio is on the air now. Welcome everybody to boarackradio. I'm your host Carlos Rojas of Morphs Unlimited, and with me is my co-host Thomas Cobb of Boa Addicts. Tom, what's up, brother?
Good. Same old, different day.
Yeah, man. So our guest today is Chris Gilbert of Gilbert Boas. So Chris is based out of Pennsylvania. He's well known for his outstanding work with various boamorphs, but also he's a longtime sand boa breeder, and we really are going to get into that stuff because that is something that a lot of people are slowly picking up on and shifting in that direction. Chris, welcome to the show, man.
Hi, thanks for having me on.
So, Chris, for those of you that don't that are listening that don't have the pleasure of knowing about you, give us a little bit of your background and how you got involved with boas.
Sure. So, growing up, living out in the country, Dad would always catch snakes in the yard and keep them for a little while and then let them go. But it wasn't until 2001, I was in 8th grade, got a pet ball python for Christmas that year, and that just started opening the door into research into what the animal was that I had, and that led down the world of kingsnake.com and the online forums.
Oh, yeah.
All the breeders and all the books and everything else, and it just took me on a deep dive to boas and pythons. So I ended up going pretty crazy initially. Second snake I ever had was an Amazon tree boa. Then I had some Solomon Island ground boas, and then rough-scaled sand boas. So I bred those rough scales my sophomore year in high school. That was 2004. Produced a nice little litter, and after that I was hooked and liked the idea of this whole live breeding thing and not having to worry about eggs, and started going with the boamorphs after that. So that took me on a tangent for a number of years, and then I started getting back into the sand boas in 2017, and then back into the tree boas in 2018.
Okay, gotcha. So let me ask you something. Outside of reptiles, what are some of the other things you're into or things that you're passionate about?
Personal interests. I do a lot of home remodeling and design work there, and I guess finance is both my career and a passion and interest there as well, and just business in general, and a little bit of interest in cars as well.
Oh, cool, dude. So what about finance? Like, what attracted you to kind of that profession? And the reason I'm asking is because my daughter's actually studying that at Arizona State right now.
I went on a very big tangent there as well. I originally was going to school for aerospace engineering, and then you had a bunch of this is pre-financial collapse of the world, and
right,
which we're going through another one right
I like
now.
that example. Right.
And all the big banks are coming up for recruitment events and talking about the world that I didn't know existed. So that's what kind of took me down that. I figured that would be an interesting way to broaden my horizons and see some new challenges.
Oh, nice, man. So when you started taking kind of the snake breeding a little bit more seriously, was there some sort of event or something that kind of made you take that next step from recreational collector into a small scale breeder, and then eventually into like a bigger scale breeder? Kind of what was some of those kind of defining moments?
Sure. So whenever I first got into things, I was just picking up a couple different boamorphs here and there. I was sophomore in high school, so certainly didn't have much money, but had the old boa constrictor manual, that little small paperback book. Had the pictures of all the different morphs at that time point. So I would go through there, look them up, put them on, go through Google and see what came up, see what the breeders came up. A lot of people had their websites. You could either type in their name.com or type in the morph.com, and somebody had a domain name registered to it.
Right.
Looking up the blood boas in that book, I came across Tom Burke, and then through him, through his website, also came across the leopard boas and a lot of the other Nicaraguan stuff.
Nice,
so, it started right with there, and so that was 2004. The first bloody salmons were produced, and that was the first time actually, and I don't know of any other point in boa history where a morph actually shot up in price. So before the bloody salmon was produced, blood boas had been $3,500 for forever.
Right.
After that bloody salmon was produced, they went up to 75 grand, or I'm sorry, 7,500.
Yeah.
And the bloody salmons were 15,000. It was the top of the morph game, and certainly that pushed them way out of my price range.
Right.
But talking with Tom, I ended up getting a pair of possible hets from him, and then with that, my other interest is the leopards, and I worked and saved every penny that I could make that summer, and saved up enough money to buy a leopard boa. The following year from Hans Winter directly in Germany, had it shipped over right before Daytona that year, and so I had my little foundation there. Right, I had the leopard boa, and I had the possible het bloods from Tom. So 2007, spring semester, my freshman year of college, that was first time that previous season was the first time breeding Imperator, and I got those possible het bloods to breed. Fortunately, didn't hit, but as everybody knows, putting two 66% hets together is a long shot, but still got a healthy litter, and just kept going from there. One of the animals that I had acquired early on was a really nice orange tail hypo, and that was kind of my first vision into looking at something and saying, I'm not going to, if I'm going to breed anything, I obviously need to be able to find homes for these animals. I can't go out there and compete with somebody that's producing 1,000 albino boas or 1,000 jungle boas.
Right.
So what am I going to be able to do to differentiate myself? Well, there's a couple people working with leopards. They've been in the country since 2002. They should be able to breed right now. The people are going to probably be producing them. So I shouldn't just go make more leopards. What I should do is say that hypo that I had, I really like her color. It'd be really cool if I could get this marbled pattern on this leopard in that. So I'm going to breed and make hypo het leopards. So that was, I actually had a number of things going on at the same time. So the other one, in addition to these two key morph projects that have kind of been going long since I started, I was big into locality boas, and I had the opportunity whenever Costa Rica had allowed some exports in 2004. Ernie Eisen was the importer. I got them through Kevin Barnett, then of Ectothermics, who a lot of people know the name, that have been around for a long time. He was big on breeding Bolivian boas.
Yep.
And he had brought those in. He was really good at acclimating wild caught and import animals. I had a chance to get those, and subsequently some Panamanian Boas. So all these things were being raised up at the same time. And it all kind of came to fruition that year for the 07-08 season. So here I am. I've got a leopard boa, an orange tail hypo, some Liberia Costa Ricans that had never been bred in the U.S. before, the Panamanian boas that had never been bred in the U.S. before, a couple other things. We're trying to work on the Blizzard project before everybody found out that the Type 2 Annery and the Albino weren't actually compatible.
Right.
And that first year there, I just went by the same advice that I had from prior years and went with the same temperatures, and I wasn't getting anywhere with my leopard stuff. And that was, leaning back then towards the locality knowledge and expertise that I got from Gus Renfro and Ben Russo, and then talking to Tom Burke, who had been working with leopards. They said, you're just keeping them too hot. I'm like, well, I'm already cooling them. I already did a night drop, everything else. Said, no, colder. And took the advice. It worked. That year I ended up producing the orange tail hypo het leopards, the first Liberia Costa Rican boas born in the U.S., and we also produced the Panamanian boas for the first time in captivity that were documented pure after Panama had lifted a 10-year hiatus on export bans back in 2005 when we got those animals. So it was a big, kind of all rushing in at once, and now I've got a bunch of new stuff that nobody else has, and that really helped get my name out there, and both on the morph side and on the locality side, and I just spun it from that point on.
Yeah, man. And that's honestly where I first heard from you was actually your work on the locality stuff, right? So I think that's probably what a lot of the people that are listening that are familiar with you probably know you from. So you mentioned kind of briefly along that you received some help and assistance from Vin Russo and then Tom Burke. Were there any other people besides there who kind of mentored you in the beginning and kind of gave you tips as you kind of matured through the boa game?
Those were the two big ones, along with Gus Renfro. Other ones that were smattering in there, Sean Bradley at Exotics by Nature
Oh,
and Celia Chen worked with him
yeah,
at the time. Mike Weitzman, basically Boas, and
yep,
also had Jeremy Stone and Dan and Colette Sutherland with Snake Keeper. So I had been talking with all of them, and most of those names had bred leopard boas by that point.
right,
There weren't very many people breeding those. Obviously, Gus wasn't one to breed that as a morph boa. That was a no-no for him, and
yeah,
I certainly had to tread lightly with getting further information from him, as he knew that I was not only working with morphs, but I took a pure Sonoran leopard and bred it to an orange tail hypo. So
right,
blasphemous.
yeah.
Yeah, he was going to be a little bit unhappy with that scenario.
So, dude,
They were both morphs though, so in that regard, I was
yeah,
taking two ruined animals to start.
Yeah, exactly. So means to an end.
yeah. But hey, man, you ended up producing some real good stuff. So let's talk a little bit kind of your current primary project focuses. I know you've touched on the blood and on the leopard stuff that's kind of continuing, but let me know some of the other boa morphs that you're currently working with, and maybe some of the other localities that you're currently working with.
So both the blood and the leopards actually took a ramp up in 2010. Um, Delaware had outlawed breeding boas. That was one of the things that spun out of the culmination of efforts to try to make a national ban on boas and other large constrictors. And Bill Kirby was the only boa breeder really in the state there, and he was forced to close up shop, sell off his collection. So myself and Kevin Blumenthal pretty much split most of Bill's collection, and with that came the motley het leopards that fit in on the existing hypo het leopard project that I had. They came with the Nicaraguan T positives. It came with the hog bloods and Jungle's possible het blood. So that's what and an original bloody salmon from 2004. So I use those animals, and working with them directly, and some of them that I'm still breeding have created what I'm working on now, which is just continuing to evolve those blood and leopard genes. Bill had the foresight to look at a blood boa and say, these are red, but they get dark. And how can we improve the color? And one thing that we were also seeing was now that they were being bred into Colombian morphs, not only did they get dark, but they were getting brown.
Right.
Certainly wasn't attractive. You get an animal, it looks pretty as a baby, and then 2 years from now, it's brown. We don't want to create ball python morphs here, right? We want stuff that's going to improve with age. So he went and looking at, again, on those bases of those different localities, said, what can I introduce here that's not going to be another mutation that could add another wrench, but what is I can enhance on this naturally. So he took a pure El Salvador blood, bred it to Hog Island, made very light colored crosses that were hets, and
Right.
then made bloods from those, which have been able to maintain their color as adults. So I produced more of those, took his jungle possible het bloods, bred those in, produced the Ambrosias in 2012. That led to then breeding back to the original bloody salmon, producing the salmon Ambrosias in 2016. Also took Nicaraguan hypo blood, bred it back to his hog hets, and produced some type 2 ghosts and hog bloods that were using Nicaraguan hypo and have the hog lineage in there. And then also hypomotley blood. So those animals now are just getting to the point where they're able to breed. Some of them are being paired up right now. Some of them will be paired up next year. But it's just to continue that to the next step. Just different combos in that range, and just trying to make them just more colorful boas. And on the leopard side, those original orange tail hypos and the motleys had produced the eclipse and hypo eclipse and hypo leopards over the past few years, and I never kept a whole lot of those, but I always kept a few leopard stuff. And I was more interested in one of the projects that I couldn't do until I got the animals from Bill was mixing in the Nicaraguan T positive. And in
Right.
2011, I did that with my original leopard male. And I've only ever used my original leopard male to make hets of different things. I haven't used him to make more leopards. And those double het T positive leopards, again, I took a nice light blood, kept it pure Sonoran, tried to limit the other genes in there, cut out Panamanian from hypos everybody else was using, cut out Colombian from all other mixed lineage, just try to keep it as basic as possible.
Right.
And so I made the double het T positive Nicaraguan leopards. By the time I made mine in 2011, double visuals were already produced, but we don't see them anymore, right?
Right.
It seemed like a dead project. Well, 2016, I hit on a Sunglow T positive leopard that is and has been one of the most mind blowing combinations that's ever existed, and that's a big focus now. And then that original leopard
And
again,
I can attest to that animal too, because I remember I think it was Tinley in 17 was the last time I went, and I always see you there in October when I go. You had that animal on display, and you can see these pictures and stuff online, and a lot of the time people are like, oh, I'm trying to capture their natural essence so much better than the photos can explain. And I'm not a huge fan of non-VPI TPOS stuff, but when I saw this particular animal, I was astounded with the amount of color. But to harken back to what Chris had said, like his entire project focus since he began was to kind of build upon the like blocks. Like you need a strong foundation to build a better top, right? The animal has only gotten better from the progressive pics that I've seen of this snake that he's given me over years and that he's posted online. The animal is 10 times or 100 times even more colorful and vibrant than it was as a baby. And a lot of the times you see these animals as babies and they're phenomenal, but then that
Right.
2-year mark hits and you're like, oh, it's very unimpressive. And that particular T positive leopard that he produced, the Sunglow, is, still to this day, an absolute phenomenal animal. And I've regretted not getting into leopard as much after seeing some of the stuff that Chris has done. And hindsight's always 20/20. I've had some, but I got rid of them all, and then now I'm like so far behind on most projects that I probably won't join too much in. I got one project I'm doing which is way out of Chris's wheelhouse, at least for now. Maybe in like 2 years he's going to be a punk and try and copy me, because that's
I'm not
what
copying.
happens.
I'm leapfrogging ahead of you.
leapfrog, yeah.
So-
Just man. I'll see you at Tinley.
That's right,
No,
man.
you won't. You don't go out.
You might have to after this whole quarantine, man. Everybody's
That's
being
what
a
I'm
little crazy.
saying. Yeah.
So, dude, actually, let me ask both of you guys something. One of the things that I've kind of started noticing is that you guys are not alone in thinking that some of the Central American blood really, if mixed correctly, will hold color significantly better than some of the Colombian stock, right? Do you guys think that as years begin to kind of progress throughout this hobby, we're going to see more people kind of dipping into the Central American stuff?
I mean,
I
I think
think
so.
there's
It's just diversity
potential.
of stuff. You
Yeah.
have those genes that they want to add in, and they can't. We're seeing it now with the Inca stuff is going over. There's as if there's not enough connected circle back ladder tail morphs in
Right.
Colombians. They decided they needed to steal the Inca gene over there too.
Yeah, Inca blew up because Dan's 40 minutes from me over here down Sutherland at TSK, and I remember him and his wife Colette. They would always send me out blast emails, like once or twice a year when they're kind of going through the collection. They're like, hey, do you want any of this stuff? Come grab it. And every single year I picked up racks from him in like 2012. So we're talking like 8 years. There's always been Incas on there. And in the last 2.5 to 3 years, you're seeing them go up exponentially in price. Just because now all of a sudden people are catching on like, oh, look what we can do. Look what it can add. And like Chris said, circle back ladder tail, well, there's a lot of them, right? There's not a whole major differentiation between a lot of them. But then when you couple in the color, the potential of other recessives added in there, you're seeing a big influx of people. And then, size is a consideration too, because many times Chris is the king of having these age-old boas that are 5-6 years old, and you would think that they were, a average power-fed keeper's 1 year old, but they're
Right.
producing healthy litters. They'll drop like maybe what, Chris? This last year you had your Sun Dragon litter. She dropped like 5 or 6 babies and one slug.
Yeah.
So when you're looking at the ratio of healthy babies, healthy mom, healthy dad, and then one slug, granted, you only get a small quantity of babies because the female's small, but she does perfect, right? Recovers well. She didn't even look like she had babies after one meal, And so I think coupled with the size of these animals, people are kind of going towards that central line a little more because you can keep. God, if I had kept all central stuff like the size of Chris's, I mean, I could have 2,000 snakes in the same area that I do my collection right now.
And not to mention for the same feeding costs a lot of time. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'd be.
I was going to say on that can be a negative though too, because I will say that you have an animal that is only producing 5 or 10 babies versus one that's producing 50.
Yeah, and your best example. What was your best example? It was your T positive leopard, right? Your sunglow. Didn't it take you like four times or something to actually finally hit that snake, or
one,
was it eclipse, or what was it?
I've had. Yeah, so the famous one is the eclipse. So the Sunglow T positive leopard, I got really lucky on that. That was actually I've been doing 2 projects simultaneously. One's for Sunglow T positive leopard, the other is for T positive blackberry. T positive blackberry I still haven't hit, but so each of those litters could produce just the T positive leopards. Total in that project, I've done 7 litters. I hit the Sunglow T positive leopard on the second attempt for Sunglow, but on the first attempt for Sunglow, I didn't hit any leopards or any T positives.
Wow.
I just had
remember that.
Four hypos and 4 normals. And I'm like,
that's rough.
Like, well, the hypos split nicely. I got nothing else. And I'm like, if I didn't make the hets myself, I would have assumed that these are not het.
Yeah. That's enough. I mean, odds you should have had at least 2.
Right. And then
so
we jump. Like the other project talking about, the motley leopards. That was one that was hilarious because. So many people would be like, "Oh, it's just a motley leopard. Why do they cost so much? I'll just go make another one." Like, okay, go ahead. I don't, anybody else that was making Eclipse stuff had stuff either from myself or Kevin. I don't know that anybody actually started and did their own from scratch. I mean, I spent 7 litters over a 3-year span before I hit on one Eclipse, and that's just a 1 in 8 combo. And those were half Colombian litters, so I'm still getting 20 babies in a litter.
Right. Yeah. And if he had not made this stuff himself again, he would have been like, nah, someone sold me some bunk stuff. And so, that we've seen some funky odds throughout litters throughout, the history of snakes. I remember Jeff Ronnie did one, Colombian base, and I think he had 30, or no, maybe it was Ryan Horsch. He had like 33 babies in this litter, and it was a het to a het, I believe, and he got 1 visual out of it, out of like 33 babies.
Well, that was the first litter for Albinos that Pete ever produced. And that's the famous story. It was over 20 babies. Everybody's they're watching this female give birth, and one after another are normals, and it was the last baby that was an albino.
Yeah. I remember hearing that. And see, that's another thing that's wonderful about Chris. For anyone who hasn't had the opportunity to like dive into the encyclopedia of boa knowledge, this guy is literally like Boapedia when it comes to the history of animal. And that's why, because as being like a internet troll the vast majority of my time, I enjoy watching Chris, because he's not intending to troll, but he trolls it unintentionally just by proving that people don't know what the hell they're talking about. And I love it because then I don't obviously have to say anything. I mean, when it comes to like history and stuff, he far outclasses me. I'm very novice in comparison, but yeah, his knowledge base with that history, just being able to say, oh yeah, here's what Pete's first litter did, and it had this many babies, and look, the last one was that. Not even a lot of people know the origins of where everything that we have today comes from, and that's why having people like Chris in the game is so important, because they bring that knowledge.
Absolutely.
I wonder how many people know that there were like, I forget now, so this is one where I'm going to forget, but I know Pete got 2 of the albinos, but there were between 4 or 7 original imports.
Right, and the original guys that got him could never get him to breed at all.
Right.
A couple of them died in captivity, yeah.
Pete comes along, never bred a boa ever, says, I'm going to invest in this project.
And he produced, and I've been told, through grapevine, but the animals were around 18 months old, 20 months old
Yes.
when
Yeah,
they were bred.
they were very
And
young.
and so, when you couple that in as a novice keeper, never breeding boas before, taking a notoriously genetically difficult animal because albinism itself is dysfunctional, right? So they're very sensitive and prone to issues and dying young and yada yada. And then breeding them at 18 or 20 months old and then actually hitting it. I mean, and then you look at what we're doing today and how available they are in combinations in the morphs. I mean, when you take back that snippet, that little small part in time, where if one thing went wrong, we might not even have what we got right now. I mean, it's pretty kind of, it's really deep to think about, and it makes you more appreciative of what we have now. I think people kind of lose sight on the beginnings, and they can't really appreciate everything that goes into it. And that's why with like a lot of stuff that Chris has specialized in, people didn't really start to take notice when they were first I mean, like the important people in the projects did, but general keepers weren't, kind of like, eh. But now it's like, I want bloods, I want bloods, I want bloods, I want hypobloods. They're seeing
Well,
all this
we all
stuff.
saw the price of bloods just completely jump up the last 3 years,
And it
again
still is
for the second time,
it's
right?
Yeah, it still is. I mean what you could buy bloods for 5 years ago as neos, you're paying twice what for like a good quality one. Of course
So
you're going to pay more money
I've had
now.
the same price on my bloods from when I made my first visual litter in 2011 until last year.
And that's unheard of. That's unheard
And
of.
that's
Right.
and I mean my prices are high, if anything.
Well, yeah, because you
So
don't want to actually sell them. You price it so that, like, if people
but
want to pay it.
I sell regular bloods, between 800 to $1,000 for the 50% hog stuff, and whereas somebody can go out and just get a generic blood boa for $500.
Right.
But
Yeah.
that animal is, they now know, like, I think I've driven that home enough too, is ask for pictures of the parents, because I don't need to
Well,
say anything
I
else.
think that, so for any listeners listening in and new people, that's a key thing right there. Ask for pictures of the parents, because we can see these babies, and a lot of the times babies are very vibrant and they're very colorful and they're cute and it's cool and it's neat. But then when they hit 3 years old or 2 years old, and you're just kind of like, oh man, like I love you, but what the hell happened? Like you were so pretty, and then you turned into the ugly duckling. If you ask for pictures of the parents, you really get to see what that lineage can bring to the table. And especially with bloods, I mean, I think that that's super. I mean, any recessive morph, for sure. If you like aneries, you need to see what a quality anery looks like. If the parents are dark and dingy and brown, have that expectation out of the offspring, unless something markedly was changed. It goes across the board for all the morphs. You get what you pay for.
No, absolutely,
Absolutely.
man. And then one thing I will say, one thing with that, there are times where you might need a specific look to an associated blood, right, for a project that you're working on.
Absolutely.
And we ended up talking a little bit about this in regards to like IMG morphs, with both Mike Roscoe of the Reptile Shop, and then with Tyler of Chroma Constrictors, right?
Right.
Because, like, for example, you look at an IMG, a lot of times you're going to have an IMG that as an adult is absolutely jet black. And then you'll have an IMG that as an adult is darker, right? It maybe is black in certain areas, but definitely the black isn't overpowering. Now, to say one is better than the other is kind of dependent on what you need it to do for your future project.
Absolutely.
Right? So
Yeah.
that's
So, like I had one of the last boas that Bill Kirby produced. He actually had a litter in 2010. Female was already gravid whenever the law went into effect. So after she gave birth, I got a albino possible het blood from him, and so I ended up working that into the bloody salmon, making some hets and keeping those back. And I had produced some sun dragons and red dragons this past summer. But that was one
Odds
project
king.
that I did
Odds
not.
king, by the way.
13 babies, and I hit 3 dragons.
Yeah, odds king. Unbelievable.
Well, again, making up for those crappy ones on those other combos years ago.
That's true.
But but that was one project that I intentionally did not use my hog blood stuff on,
Right.
because the lighter colors of the hog, I was like, that's not going to help me. That's not going to do what I wanted to do. So I left it out. And I think
Yeah,
that's one
the
aspect
darker
I've-
that het will be, will
Right.
typically feed into a darker visual form of that albinism, which I think a lot of people don't think about.
Right. That's one thing that, I've always looked at there is with my, start with boas as a locality focused. I've focused on those different nuances in wild types, what traits are there as part of natural diversity, and I think it helps with selective breeding then, because then when you know the full lineage of these animals, which bloodline is going to give you what you want and which is not going to give you what you want. So now I'll go back to my original hypo leopard project. I picked a hypo that had thick saddles, a bold symmetrical pattern, and high saddle count pattern density.
Right.
The idea was hypo obliterates pattern mutations.
Yep.
So I don't want to do that. I want to just take the leopard's marbled pattern and turn it orange. That first hypo leopard that I produced did exactly that, and there's a picture on my website, and it's circulated the internet over the years. Back in 2012, I'm sitting there holding that one baby in my hand, and it's a completely marbled hypo leopard. Now, I kind of got lucky on that because I got that from the first litter, and all the rest of them since then haven't actually come out marbled. But the ability to make that marbled pattern was there from focusing on the original female, the hypo female's pattern itself, and not just saying, oh, I'm just going to mix any hypo into a leopard, or even just picking a hypo just for color, but looking at the pattern as well.
Right. And I mean, like, what you just did there is you essentially proved your approach, right? You came in with the mindset of what you wanted to produce and a theory of what it would do when these two genes reacted together. And essentially, when you held that first baby, you knew that you had, calculated correctly with that. Now,
it worked right once. That's all.
Yeah. Yep. So let's pivot a little bit. Talk a little bit about your work with tree boas and maybe some of the items, some of the various things that you're doing with them.
So I am actually very new on the scene with those. As I mentioned earlier, I was that was my second species of snake that I ever had, but then took a hiatus from them. So in 2017, I picked up some northern emerald tree boas, getting back into things because I knew I always wanted to have basins one day, but I wasn't willing to spend the money for basins without keeping some tree boas first and making sure that I wasn't going to do anything wrong. And so I had those for a year or so. Then I was able to pick up my cousin down in Florida is big into tree boas, so he's been nagging me like, when are you going to do? I'm like, listen, I had tree boas before you did, so I'll get there. But I had this one vision in mind of these old calicos that I really wanted, and I said, is anybody producing these? When one of those becomes available, I'll get it. So we were talking one night, and he said, just check out this breeder's page. So pulled up Rory Gresco's website and go to his page, and there on there is this awesome red female, and it's exactly what I wanted. There's no price tag on it, nothing. I'm like, well, I don't have any clout with this guy. He doesn't know who I am. So I have my cousin call him, say, can we get this? Throws out a number, pay for it, get that, and that just took me down on a quick dive. So last year, had the opportunity through cultivating that relationship with Rory to get some really phenomenal, more red tiger calico combos there. A lot of things. So one thing that I'm trying to work on now is trying to unwind a lot of the projects that all these breeders that have had success for years, if not decades, on tree boas that haven't really focused on, I'll just call it the predictability of recreating certain phenotypes,
right? And
trying to figure out exactly what is a true mutation and statistically reproducible versus what are selectively bred traits versus, that defining what is the wild type. And I have a lot of theories on that. Most of those aren't going to be public just yet. But after that, I got an opportunity. Finn Russo produced an annulated tree boa litter, was able to pick up a female from there. And then just this past week was able to pick up a pair of Amazon Basin emeralds from Ed Marino. So rounded out the core group there. So we've got both species of emeralds, annulateds, Amazon tree boas. The only thing we don't have right now are Ruschenbergi and Grenadensis on the Corrales group, and then the Malagasy and Solomon Island species for the broader tree boa defined.
So let me ask you, what specifically is attracting you over to the tree boas?
Um, the curiosity in trying to figure out what's going on the Amazon tree boas, trying to figure out what's going on with the genetics there, and if answers can be found. Amazons are not well behaved. They like to bite. I've been fortunate so far and haven't been bit by mine. But with that, I said, these are really cool animals, but I'd like to have some that I could actually interact with and handle. So that became the annulatids in the Amazon basins, which are a lot more trustworthy, I should say.
Okay, got it. Now,
These are just, they're special projects to me because, the kind of keeper that keeps tree boas is, isn't the one that's going to be sending you a message on Morph Market saying, is it tame? They're not going to be the one saying, what size, how much does it weigh? What size food does it eat?
well, you could say what you actually mean on that one, Dan. And at the end of the day, if you're keeping tree boas, you need a higher husbandry skill level, right?
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's really what it comes down to.
So it helps, in that future, whenever I am breeding them, it's just interacting with a customer that's going to have that different level of experience, and I think is a positive thing.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. So the other species I wanted to talk to you about was actually the sand boas. So sand boas are one of those species that for a while have flown under the radar a lot. There's always been this like community of hardcore keepers of sand boas who have developed this series of morphs. What drew you into the sand boas?
Whenever I got my first ones, it was just one of those finding those weird animals in the backseat or boa and python books, and the rough-scaled sand boas in particular were neat because if you look closely at them, the head profile is the same head shape that you see on a boa constrictor or a tree boa or many pythons. That curved structure. It wasn't the wedge shape like on the Kenyans or other subterranean species. So that aspect was like, oh, they're just like a little mini boa, but then they also act like a pit viper, and they oftentimes aren't going to open up their mouth and strike and bite. They will launch their entire body off the ground.
Yeah, they literally jump.
Headbutt you.
Yeah.
So that was, like I said, that was the first thing I ever bred, partially because it was small, easy to keep. It doesn't require a lot of space. That's one of those species that you can actually go and say, go to the pet store and get a 10-gallon tank and put a heat lamp on, and you'll do okay.
Yeah.
With that, I did build a fairly sizable group of rough scales, but also got into all the different Kenyan morphs. So that was a funny one too, because the last time I had sand boas, while I didn't have Kenyans, I still followed that. And back then, a lot of the breedings that are done now were blasphemous. They wanted to keep things pure. So there were Rufessans, there were the Kenyans, there were the Egyptians. So like the regular albinos are actually Egyptian sand boas, and the paradox albinos were Kenyan. And there were a lot of people that didn't like the idea of crossing the Egyptian albino over and didn't like that snow project. VPI was actually the one that was doing the paradox snow project. So if people listening don't know, paradox albino in Kenyan sand boas is a genetic mutation. It's recessive. That spotting is going to come through, and it's an oddity in that world. So now we jump forward, and people crossed Rufessans over into Kenyans. That's what gave them the stripes and the tigers. The albinos and anneries, everything else is getting mixed in. They then took, the locality Dodoma from Tanzania, bred those in, created some other looks. So there's a whole lot of other stuff going on. But I think the one that really leapfrogged the sand boas into more limelight was the paint mutation, which is a recessive color and pattern mutation. And it just, widens out the pattern on the back, and just that base color really comes through. And yeah, there's a big hardcore following of people that really take them seriously and massive collections of them. But one of the big appeals there, so the inverse to the tree boas being for that, more experienced keeper, the sand boas are the perfect one for that person getting their first snake.
Right.
The kid that's going to have an aquarium in their bedroom, and they want the snake to be alive and healthy and do well and not suffer. Sand boas are perfect.
So, are there any specific projects within kind of the sand boa domain that have you excited right now?
I am literally doing a little bit of everything. I have like one of each with the Kenyan stuff. On the rough scales, it was just I got a group. I got 7 or 8 of them, and there's not a whole lot there. There's not any real true morphs. There's one like kind of a hypo. There might be a caramel gene things going on, but nothing conclusive. And then I also have Miliaris, which I'm against using the common name of, but it's the Russian sand boas. The reason I'm against that is they're from Kazakhstan, which at one point was part of the USSR, but Kazakhstan predated Russia and has never been part of Russia, so I don't like the idea of calling them Russian sand boas. It should be Kazakh boas, or just call them Miliaris, which is the scientific name, and we'll be good. But I have a super black, is what it's called on that, which I don't actually know the genetic detail on it. I think it kind of works like a dominant thing, but also kind of polygenic, selectively bred aspect. So, unfortunately, I've only been able to get the original female that I got there, so I'm still hunting for a male. But so I've actually got 3 different species of the sand boas, and so just play around with it for fun. You know, they take up they as adults sit in my baby racks for my boas, so it's great.
Yeah, no, I bet. And I think that's one of the big potentials with that species, right? Is for those people that are maybe interested in starting a boa collection, but obviously they're very limited in space, but yet they'd still like to explore the genetics and explore the breeding that's kind of involved with it, and essentially use, I hate to say it this way, but almost use the sand boas to really understand what it takes to get a species to breed and be successful with it. That's a good place to start, right?
Yep. That's what I did with mine whenever I bred them back whenever I was in high school. You know, it's just, hey, I've never bred snakes before, you know, let alone the issue with live versus laying eggs. You know, it'd be cool to breed something that give birth to live young, and it's an experience that led me down the boa world for the past almost 20 years now. So
yeah, man. Yeah, it's like it's the rabbit hole, and I think we've all kind of been there where once you get bit, man, it's hard to stop. I mean, that's why my page is called Boa Addicts, because and my parents like tripped out when I said that, right? Like when I came up with that name, they're like, "No, that sounds bad. Like everyone's gonna think you're a drug addict." And I was like, I was like, but that's like legitimately what it's like. Like you can't.
That was my dad's joke. He's, you know, whenever I got those first boas from Tom Burke, he said, you know, Tom Burke's like a drug dealer. He gives you a little bit of a sample to reel you in.
Yeah, it's exactly what happens, dude. Like they give you a taste, and then you're screwed from then on out. And it really takes like an act of God to really pull people off. And you know, throughout the years, I'm talking like diehards. You know, like the people who you can really feel like they have a diehard passion for it. I mean, it would really take something super important to have you pull off of having a collection and growing it and, you know, obtaining new projects and yada yada. Of course, we had the fly-by-nights. People come in who just throw money around and think that, hey, it's easy, set it and forget it, until they get a real dose of reality, try and breed and screw up and kill stuff, and then they're like, oh no, this isn't for me. No, they'll eat 50 grand and walk away. But like for your diehards who have been dreaming of like literally having a zoo, which was my thought as a child, I have a 3rd grade journal. You know how your teachers in 3rd grade, they're like, oh yeah, write down what you want to be when you grow up. My things, legitimately, I'm not even kidding you, was I wanted to be a doctor, and so I guess I'll do that when I get my PhD. I wanted a Lamborghini. I'll get that when I feel it's justified. And then I wanted to be a herpetologist. I literally wrote that down when I was in 3rd grade. And so like when I met my wife in 2010, I'm like, oh yeah, let's get a couple snakes again. And so I grabbed some like call Moonglow based stuff, and just from there, and now it's ballooned into like this massive operation where but I go in there, it's like cathartic, and I enjoy it, and I clean the animals and I check them, and it's like fun, you know. I don't look at it as a chore or work necessarily, you know. I enjoy it, and it's that rabbit hole that you just never can quite come back out of. Like I couldn't imagine not having snakes at this point. And I mean, Chris, he sent me the pictures of the Amazon basins that he was picking up, and I'm just like, God Christ, like I wish I could right now, like so bad. And so I just
taunt Thomas with all the stuff that he needs to get whenever he gets.
God, he does, and he
Dude, the
too,
struggle is real, man. You sent me a picture the other day, bro, on Messenger. I'm like, ooh.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
How can I work that in?
I think I have 15 different species of snakes right now. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And see, to me, I that's actually something that I want to do eventually. Is I do want to kind of get out of the main boa stuff that I do, and I want to get into the more specialty niche. And that's like I think where Chris has really excelled in his obtainment of certain species, but not only certain species, but the quality and the lineage of those species. When he goes back to like being able to deal with customers or prospective buyers in the future, he can lean back on lineage, lean back on quality, lean back on the history, and lean back on his current care. It'll be no brainer on how easy it will be to move those animals that he does want to move. Now I venture to guess when he breeds his basins for the first time at some point, years down the road. I highly
I'm
doubt
gonna have to
he'll
recover
many
the
of them.
investment on that one. What are you talking about?
Yeah. Well, no, but you'll do that with your leopard and blood stuff because I venture to guess that you're going to end up keeping all those damn things if you're not sending me something. But I'm highly jealous of a lot of the projects that he has going on. I figure one day when I'm in a capacity to kind of learn the arboreal stuff, I'll lean on Chris's knowledge for that. And once we get some cage manufacturers that can come out with something that justifies doing like a wall setup, I might dive into that. I mean, I look at Chris in a very high esteem when it comes to the broad range of species that he keeps, because a lot of people just really struggle keeping even a quarter of that stuff. I mean, a lot of people can't even keep a boa well, let alone like a basin or something that is such an expensive animal that if you screw up, you're going to feel that for a long time.
100%, man. You know what's funny? One of the things that you guys ended up saying there was that once you kind of get bit by the bug, you always have it, right? And that's actually something that came up a couple of podcasts ago when I had Dave Schmidt, who's a former special operations guy. He was the same thing. He basically had bred boas prior to being in the military. He goes in the military, does 10 years of special operations work. And as soon as he got any level of stability, what do you think was his first purchase?
He bought a freaking boa, man. Yep. Yeah.
Yep.
It wasn't a couch. It was a boa.
I think the joke is like
You can sit on the floor.
Yeah, dude. Well, the joke with
Tommy
him,
Matt, man.
well, you know what? The joke with him was that he got married so that he could get stability, so that he could get boas. You know what I mean?
That was just him crutching, trying to say it was because of the wife, but in reality, he'd been hankering for it for a long time.
Dude.
And see, the same thing happened with me. Is I think once I had that stability, once I had been married, we had my first son, and my daughter was on the way, and I was like, well, I've always been in construction, so I was like, well, I could just build my own racks. I mean, this is simple enough. Sterilites this, put some flex wire or what heat tape in the back, which is what I did when I first got back in.
Right.
And at that first year, I mean, I picked them all up in 2012, and I bred 4 pairings in 2012, hit all 4 in 2013. So I went 4 for 4. So
Yeah.
then when you start hitting stuff, like that year that Chris produced, the 2 America's First, or North American Productions captive bred plus I think it was his leopard stuff or his blood stuff, whichever one he mentioned in the beginning. When you have that level of success in your first time doing something, you're like, oh man, I'm gonna keep going with this, and then you just obtain and get more and more, and then you start keeping the stuff you produce, and then you produce from the stuff you produce, which is I think the ultimate goal that keepers should really strive for. Become self-sufficient in the lineage and the production of your animals, because then through the line everything that's been done and put into that snake, so you can give that to your customers in the future.
Yeah, no, absolutely, man. And you know what's actually funny? Your kids, when they're exposed to that, they actually appreciate it. Like, I have a bunch of boas here that my kids called the great grandma boas, right? Which are boas that I think I picked up in like 2000-ish, who are now like retired breeders, but I mean, they're still kicking around this place. You know what I mean? And they've produced tons of babies. They've made me a ton of money, and these guys are kind of still hanging around over here, and their great grandkids are in my baby racks right now. So.
Well, and that's neat because I think it puts a level of value on the animal beyond just a monetary sense, right? One thing I always recommend to new people and prospective breeders is don't breed something if you're not willing to lose it, because I don't care how good of husbandry you have, how much money you spent on the animal. the lineage that it has, or the racks or cages that you keep it in. None of that really matters, because biology does not care about your opinion, and it does not care about your bank account. Things can happen. And so if you have an animal that you love, and you really love that animal, and you don't want to risk losing it, don't breed it. But if, like us, you also have goals, you have to weigh the risk, right? And sometimes you get bit, sometimes bad things happen, sometimes great things happen. Boa keeping and just snake keeping in general, especially breeding, it's full of a lot of highs, but there's a lot of lows too that can come along with it if you're not prepared.
Definitely, man. So, Chris, let me ask you something. Give us some lessons learned, basically, when you started kind of setting up your reptile business.
So I don't really necessarily look at it as a business. I'm definitely just one of those hobbyist breeders. Collection's not massive. Don't produce a ton of litters every year. Just a few select pairings. I think that's one thing that's actually allowed me to diversify into species was, because I kept so focused on most of my boa projects that, like Colombian boas, there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of morphs, and I didn't have that depth without dealing with that larger species. So freed up room to get some other species instead. But the biggest thing that I learned early on, well, first off, if you're going to breed, buy babies. Don't buy adult animals. Raise them up yourself, know their full history, get from breeders that are going to give you that information to be successful as well. And from another thing from an early start was get the right equipment. Whenever I first got started, I was getting boafowl cages because that was the best thing that was available. Then I ran into some shortfalls that I felt with those, and Animal Plastics had improved their product line, and I switched over to there. Then I went to ARS, and then Freedom Breeder and Vision Racks, and now I have all ARS Hybrid and the new Freedom Breeder stuff. And it's just always, look what's available that'll make your life easier, make you provide more for the well-being and care and longevity and health of the animals, and spend the money for it because it's going to pay itself off. Somebody looks at just a large Freedom Breeder rack and they're like, well, that's $3,000. That doesn't make any sense. I'm like, well, divide up the cost based off of the number of babies that are going to be housed in there. Like, you fill it one time, it's paid for itself many times over.
And the ease of care too, because
Right.
what a lot of people don't realize with tub cleaning, the ease of cleaning in tubs versus reach-in cages, I can clean an entire 1575 neonate setup, so 75 tubs, 15 levels high total. I can clean the whole damn thing in about an hour. So 75 snakes in 1 hour. And if you really want a quality clean, a reach-in enclosure, you're looking at like 20 minutes for one cage. Is if you keep on Aspen and stuff, which, I keep everyone on Aspen. And, then you're cleaning your floor because you're dropping the Aspen all over. And, what is your time worth as well? Because if you can do 75 animals in an hour, or you can do 5 in an hour, you up your ability to either keep a quantity or you lower your quantity of time used to care. I have, I think, around 380 to 400 right now, and without babies from this year that'll be born shortly. And I spend roughly 2 to 2.5 hours a day tops. And I'll usually have at least one day where I do nothing. So I'm maintaining my whole collection at a really high standard for, roughly 20 hours a week, and specifically because of the tub style caging that I use with the Freedom Breeders, I've been able to eliminate so much of my excess labor because of those cages. It was worth the money up front because it saves me on the back end with the amount of time that I can go do something else. And I think a lot of people really kind of foobar in that thought process of like, oh, I don't want to spend $3,500 on a rack. But then, like Chris said, how many can you fit in that rack? And you divide it by the quantity, and that's how many enclosures you get per rack, right? It's like $125 per cage. It's pretty good. If you're doing like a 0824, the FB80 or the FB70 tub. But yeah, people need to realize that you get out what you put in, just like in the quality of morphs and the lineage of the animal. That quality in caging, I think, is imperative too. And of course, if you would like display caging, we're not saying go one way or another. I never would. I always tell people to do what they like, what makes them happy, right? If they want to put that effort into clean reach-ins, go for it, man. There's some really killer setups I've seen out there. And, I would personally love to have 500, like, Vision T8s on a huge wall in my house and be able to stare at that with a sofa. But in reality, I couldn't care for it. It would take me
Yeah.
way too long, maintenance wise.
I think
So
one thing that people miss too is, they'll go out, they have no problem spending $5,000 on a high-end morph, and they want to keep it as cheap as possible, and they throw it
Right.
in a tub with a clip-on lid and a heat pad on a cheap $20 thermostat off of Amazon, and then when that thermostat fries their animal, they're like,
I
oh,
don't know what happened.
yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, then they try and pass the buck and be like, oh, the animal was dysfunct from whatever, or whoever, and yada yada. And yeah, I mean that's something that you see sometimes. It's an unfortunate reality that people will spend money on. I remember seeing like 5 years ago there was a scoria, and the scoria was kept inside a glass aquarium.
Yep.
A fish tank, literally with astroturf on the bottom. I'm not even shitting you. And it
Holy
had like a
shit.
heat rock in there. And I mean, this is like a legitimate scoria. And back then, 5 6 years ago, very rare still. And
somebody
I
paid
mean,
$20,000 for this animal to stick it in a fish
keep it in
tank.
an aquarium. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, when Petco does their like $1 a gallon type deal, that's kind of what happened. Like, oh, I'll go buy 20 long for $20, get some astroturf at Home Depot for $4, and then a heat rock from Amazon for $12 or whatever it is, and then I'll put it on there, and I'll put my excess weights from my dumbbell on the top to keep the snake in. I mean, it makes total sense,
Or your
right?
school books. Yep.
Yeah, or your school book, or I mean, your dirty underwear. I don't know what people are using,
Yeah.
but you know, it is kind of funny sometimes.
So, Chris, what do you see as the future of the hobby? Or at the very least, what the future that you would like to see the hobby move towards?
Um, More professionalism. I like to see people take things seriously, and that you know, in providing care for their animals, whether it is again those in-depth set up displays. We're not just talking about
Okay.
how you keep the animals too, but also just like what kind of projects they do and why, and how people behave and interact with each other. People doing research and respecting knowledge and sharing that information, not somebody that's hiding trade secrets at home and doesn't want to help other people be successful. Not having breeders just BS and talk down on each other. Also, not having breeders that are just putting any two animals together just to reproduce more animals without any care or foresight into the future. And one thing that's real a big issue now, obviously in boas and in pythons and numerous different examples, we've got all these viruses out there that people are just ignoring or continue to breed or sell sick animals and spread things. And there was a comment I saw recently. Somebody mentioned with the coronavirus. They said it's very evident that all you snake people that say you quarantine clearly don't quarantine.
Oh no,
And
it's
it's
true,
just
man.
the shortcuts that people take and care. Like, end of the day, we are responsible for these animals, and I want to see people actually realize that and care about the life that they're responsible for.
Yeah, my,
No,
my favorite is, hey, let me show you how I quarantine with these animals I just got at this expo in my main room that's sitting right behind me. Makes total sense, right?
yeah. Well, you know
I
what?
mean,
You know what's funny, man? I'm glad you guys mentioned that because proper quarantine has saved my ass multiple times, but it did recently. I ended up buying a sub-adult female super raptor from a well-known breeder about a year and a half ago. And luckily, I have a dedicated quarantine area away from my main collection. Within 3 months, this snake that was quarantined by herself ended up showing signs of arenavirus, and about a month after that, that thing ended up passing. So I thank God for proper quarantine, or else that would potentially killed off my entire collection. You know what I mean?
well, and then when people are thinking quarantine, like in reality, you need to think about minimal standards, right? And at minimum, I recommend people do a 3 month quarantine. A lot of people when I ship, especially if I'm not familiar with you as a buyer, if I don't know you as a friend, I'll ship a quarantine request, meaning please quarantine this animal for the safety of yours, but also for the safety of the one that I'm sending you, because I don't know what you got in your collection, right?
Yeah, no,
And
for
so I was
sure.
like, here's why you should quarantine. Here's what I do, and here's what I recommend. Minimum 3 months, zoological standard is 6 months. In that
Yeah,
time, where people foobar is they'll have quote unquote a quarantine area, and So say they'll be 3 months into the process of quarantine. They're like, oh man, I got to get this snake. Then they buy another snake and they take that snake and they plop it in a tub and then they throw it in the quarantine. They're like, oh yeah, it's in quarantine. Sweet. Well, what you did is you just reset the ticker. You reset the clock on that first snake. That snake now needs to be put back to zero because now you introduced it to another snake. You can't quarantine, like a dedicated quarantine where you keep introducing new animals into that quarantine. And so people, I think, have really taken a step back in kind of slowing down, like be patient, quarantine the animals, just make sure they're healthy. But it's not just to protect your current stuff, but the current animal that you just received. It's all about the care. Like Chris said, we provide for these animals strictly. They depend on us. What is our level of care for these animals, and how do we dictate that we're gonna be an appropriate keeper? Don't half-ass this stuff. It never pans out well. It never does. Like you half-ass, you're gonna be gone real quick. I promise.
Yeah, and one of the things that I personally tend to advocate is something that I actually got from my medical profession, which is like a step-down process, right? So, like, for example, if somebody were to get sick with a particular virus, okay, and they wound up in the ICU with, let's say pneumonia, okay? Once that person kind of recovers, gets off of a ventilator, you're not necessarily going to say, oh, great job, go ahead and go home. You would now shift them down out of the ICU into an inpatient setting, right? They would stay there for a set amount of time. And then once they've made improvements at that level, then eventually you would release them at that point when they go home. And when they go home, there's a series of follow-ups and things that need to happen. I kind of do the same thing with my animals. So I have kind of my initial quarantine period for brand new arrivals. And usually after, on average, 4 to 6 months, they move to kind of a level 2 quarantine, which is where I'll usually keep them another 3 months, right? Before they eventually join my collection. And I think doing that has saved my butt multiple times.
Oh yeah. Well, and just even like parasites, like mites, things like that. It can really, if any of us were to get mites in our main collection, how devastating would that be? Not only for the risk of the health of the animals, but the amount of time that would be needed to deal with the situation. I always advocate for a lack of pesticides if at all possible.
Yeah, and that's a big one. I wanted to get into that with some of my procedures and things that I do. So I'll let you finish up what you were going to say there, Tom.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say, if you were to introduce mites into your main collection, now you're inundating your entire collection with a pesticide of some form to eliminate what could have been prevented to begin with if you just had quarantined. Whereas you're needing to treat now 100 animals when all you would have had to do if you quarantined properly is treat one. One at risk of pesticide exposure is much better statistically than 100. So common sense would dictate be a little more careful. So you could take over, Chris, and say what you're going to say.
Yep. So whenever I take my snakes to shows, the few times that I do that, any babies that left my main snake room and go to a show never go back into that snake room. They are put in separate quarantine to make sure that that nothing got picked up from the show, but more so they're just never reintroduced back into the collection. So I actually have 3 areas for animals. So the ones that went to a show, that's where they go back to if they didn't sell at the show. The animals that are actually acquisition quarantine, and then my main collection itself.
That's a smart way of doing it. Yeah.
The big thing that people miss too is there's so much preventative use of pesticides, which results in having pesticide-resistant mites, and people are also not factoring in the long-term damage on the animals. I mean, pesticide exposure, whether it's permethrin which is prevent mite, or whatever thing you bought from
Nix,
Walmart or Home Depot, Goodnight spray, Nix, any of those lice sprays or bed bug sprays, those all have the same active ingredient. Or people using no pest strips with dichlorvos, the damage that those chemicals do on neurological impacts, as well as or just outright poisoning and killing the animal, or long-term shortening of the lifespan or their overall fecundity and ability to breed and produce viable, healthy litters. People aren't realizing this. All these breeders that run and have high slug counts and a lot of stillborns, babies born early and females dying after 2-3 litters, they're wondering why, or accepting those as normal practices and not realizing, no, it's everything that the animal's been exposed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, the rampant use of pesticide in the hobby. And what I see a lot of people doing this preventative exposure. Like, oh, well, I just want to treat just in case. It's like, well, if your practices are leaving that in the back of your mind of like just in case, you probably should change your practices, right? Don't go to an expo and then go waddling into your main collection after you're going around, 1,000 other people with all these tables and animals at expos and go walking in there and thinking you're not going to get mites. I've been to Tinley 3 times in October. I always go to that October one, and every single time I've gone to that show, we have our own little crews and stuff that we hang out with, and it's like, oh yeah, I guess so and so saw this table over here with mites crawling around, and it's like, okay, I mean, they're going to be there. It's just who has them, right? Somebody's going to have them. Everything that's there is potentially at risk. So if you go to a show, you can potentially bring that into your collection. So if you go to an expo, you go home, you declothe outside, you freaking go in, you take a hot shower, and you clean up, and you make sure that you are as careful as possible to not expose something to your main collection. So then what you have people doing now is I'll preventative treat. I'll put in all these no-pest strips, and I'll just leave them in there, for God knows how long. I mean, dichlorobos is super, super toxic. It degrades neuronal pathways in the brain, which is why it causes neurological disorders. Myelin fibers. It does all sorts of really bad things to your body. And it does the same thing to the snake, because the snake's biology is not vastly different than humans. It creates a higher propensity for pancreatic cancer in humans. So not only are they inundating the animals with this pesticide, they're inundating themselves. And a very popular breeder or keeper that we know, Diem, she actually had poisoned himself with no pest strip, using it when they had gotten mites. I mean, legitimately, like ER visit style, chronic bloody noses, chronic migraines, like a sore throat, chronic sore throat, like all this weird stuff had come up because of this no pest strip use. And then you have the people that are like, oh, I'll just treat the aspen once every week. I'll just spray it down and put the snake back in. But why? If you're not getting mites, there's no need. If you're getting your aspen or your bedding from a place that does not keep reptiles, meaning like Chewy.com or Pet360, directly to Harland or like a feed store, and you direct order from the manufacturers, you're not going to get mites. Now, if you go to Petco or you go to PetSmart or you go to these other places that keep reptiles, yeah, you're at risk for it.
Or buy substrate at a show.
Buy substrate at a show. I mean, it makes total sense, right?
Honestly, that's the last time I had mites, which was probably around maybe 4 years ago. I think I got picked up they picked up on the show. I didn't buy any animals, never had mites. Came back, and I think one of my kids came into the snake room because they had bought a block of cocoa bedding for one of their animals, right, for one of their lizards, and magically 2 days, or not even 2 days, I would say maybe 5 days later, that rack all of a sudden had mites. Boom. The good thing is I was able to catch on it, like when there was like I started noticing like 2 of the boas that were near there sitting, soaking for extended periods. And I went and I looked and I saw a mite on its nose, and boop, entire rack came out of the room. Immediately had to double check everybody. One of the things I do, and I do believe is, you could preventively treat some animals with something as simple as some soaking in water. You know what I mean? Some people,
yes. Soak a new acquisition in water absolutely makes sense. And
that hydrates them too.
I use cocoa substrate for my stuff now, and I take all those blocks and I freeze them.
Ooh, that's a good call.
I just you have these giant chest freezers full of rats and throw some coconut in there too.
Yeah, that's actually really smart, man.
Yeah, but it's better than using a pesticide, because you can just use a natural temperature gradient. Like if you live in a hot climate like you, Carlos, like down in Arizona, just go throw it out in the sun. Because
let it bake in the bag. Yep.
Yeah, because it's going to be inside that bag too. You're creating an interior temperature that is far hotter than just your ambient exterior, right? So you let it bake in there, throw it in the freezer, you'll be good to go. It's better than, say, breaking it up and screening it out or whatever, and then spraying it with a bunch of pesticide and then throwing your snake back on it. Because like when I have a mite treatment that I've had to do in the past, it's always been the Nix style. And the way I've justified Nix is because I was like, well, technically this is like infant lice shampoo. So if it's been FDA approved to be used on infants, the likelihood that it's going to harm a snake versus something strong like, say, no pest strip, which is proven to kill people, right? Nicks, in my experience, I've never had an ill effect. At this point, I just prevent new acquisitions, so I don't have to worry about it at all. Because the last two that I've gotten were sent to me with mites. Yeah, shout out to Shane Kinney. Thanks, dude. That was great.
One of the things that we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick break, and then Chris, if you're open to it, when we come back, I want you to kind of talk a little bit about how you essentially would recommend people nail their setup down so that they are set up the best way possible.
Sure thing.
All right, everybody, welcome back. So now we are going to talk a little bit about what it takes to really nail your setup to make sure that you have the best possible setup for your animals, not only for their health, but also to kind of improve your breeding success. So one of the toughest calls for a lot of people that have been shifting from that beginner hobbyist, quote-unquote, glass aquarium hobbyist into kind of a breeder mode where you want to keep multiple animals and you've started to realize that maybe you have to start going down the pathway of racks, is really deciding whether you go out and you get some cheap racks or you spend some money on really having a really good setup. And that, for a lot of people, seems a little bit crazy, that they would go out and spend anywhere from $2,000 to $4,000 on a rack system. But they might see this as an unnecessary expense, but really having the right caging can actually be one of the most cost-saving things that you could potentially do for your collection in the long run. So, Chris, tell us a little bit about the importance of having the right setup for a large collection.
So, put in perspective, I've completely replaced everything 4 times since 2003. So, certainly put a lot of credit, emphasis on what's available and what's the best out there. So I spoke a little bit about that before. One thing you want to obviously come out with, and this isn't just a feel-good thing. There's many ways to do things and many things that are going to work for different people. One thing that a lot of people aren't taking into consideration is where in the country they live and how their house is heated or cooled. So somebody down in Florida can get an Exoterra, and if it's got a big enough, one of the glass terrariums, if it's sized right for the animal, stick it in there and have no problem with humidity and heat. But you put that same animal in that same setup up here in Pennsylvania, it's not going to work. So figuring out those different nuances. The big thing that I always look at is I want consistency in products, and I want things to be readily available. If something breaks, if something needs replaced, if you have a tub break, are you going to be able to go to the store and buy that same tub, or is the manufacturer going to discontinue it? If you have a part of your cage or rack break, are you going to be able to go to the manufacturer and get a replacement? Or are you going to have to scrap the whole thing? Or are you going to have duct tape and glue on it to piece it back together? The material side is the next piece of that. So, what are these cages or racks made out of? Are they put together with cheap materials, or are they put together with high-end materials? And a lot of things, people don't really know the difference of what those materials are. So my background, being an engineering student whenever I was getting started with this, was very much on the material science aspect of things. Different plastics, composition, how they, different properties of them, how they are to clean, and how that came into use with reptile caging. So everybody's familiar with PVC cages. Biggest issue that I have with PVC is most PVC that's used in the reptile world now is a extruded PVC or foam core PVC or PVC-X. Those often have not only a porous core, but a porous surface. And evidence of this is difficult to see in a lot of cases because people are using black cages that hide things. But if you get certain cages in white plastics and you're seeing, you had newspaper down there and a water bowl, the snake pooped in the corner, and you went and rolled it up, and now there's a brown stain in the corner. that actually happens on a lot of these PVC products. The black ones, you'll see it under high intensity LED or black lights, but without that high intensity light, you would never see it. You could bleach the cage, that stain's never going to disappear. And things like that, those are products that you shouldn't use. And they may have been acceptable at one point when we had fewer options, but today I'd consider those just garbage. And it's a big issue for me because I look at it saying, well, the person that's manufacturing these is wasting raw materials. They're wasting natural resources. They're just filling a landfill for no reason. There are PVC options that are good. One that I've always been supportive of is animal plastics. They're just because, again, I'm familiar with it. I've used them. The surface of the plastic is smooth. It's non-porous. I never had any of those stained. I use white animal plastics cages. Would have issues around doorway openings with that raw cut edge, that staining, and sanding it down or using magic erasers, which if anybody doesn't know, they're just melamine sponges. Buy them on Amazon like for $100 for $1 instead of paying the prices at the grocery store. But they could still be cleaned and didn't have those issues. Next level up were high-density polyethylene. High-density polyethylene is a food-grade plastic. It's plastic cutting board. It's going to be made from that. Milk jugs are made out of it. Those are the two main things that everybody's going to encounter in their day-to-day life. Unfortunately, right now, there's not really any manufacturers doing high-density polyethylene in cages except for Vision. And then there's Showcase cages, which also uses a molded cage, much like Vision, but has a more decorative front, and they do a couple different colors. Freedom Breeder, with their plastic tubs, everything that's smaller than their 66 series, those are all made out of high-density polyethylene. Another material is polypropylene. Polypropylene is a lot like high-density polyethylene, except that it's a little bit, it's more rigid, so there is some structural benefits to it, but it's more prone to cracking. Where high-density polyethylene is a little bit softer and more flexible, so it's not necessarily going to have as much structural integrity. And high-density polyethylene, so like certain tubs, scrubbing them out, you could scratch them. Polypropylene might hold up a little bit better for that. Then you've got ABS. ABS plastic is very hard. In black seems to be more stable. I don't know if it's, again, just the color or if there's any additives in it. But most white ABS is not UV stable. So over time, high heat exposure, certain UV light, it can discolor. You'll see that with people that had old Neodesha cages. They came in an almond color, but then they're more yellowed. Or the older Freedom Breeder racks that had white drawers and that have turned yellow over time. Even some ARS stuff that I've seen down in keepers in Florida that are getting a lot of sun baking through their windows. The big gray tubs are made out of ABS on the 80, the 85, and their 9706 and their giant boa rack. Some of those have turned yellow over time. The next plastic is high-impact polystyrene, which is used by bars, and those are distributed by PM Herps and JPM Reptilia. That's also a solid core, smooth surface plastic that's completely disinfectable, but again, can yellow over time. Exposure to vinegar will actually, and I'm sorry, ammonia, not vinegar. Ammonia will discolor that. So knowing those differences on both the aesthetic aspects as well as the ability to last a long time and how you're going to clean it, I think really fit into picking out what makes the most sense. And then, seeing, okay, now that I know these materials, I got to look for a manufacturer, and then I got to see what options are available that fit my animal's needs. Obviously, you need to make sure that there's a big enough cage. It might be that you have to go with a manufacturer that you otherwise would have opted out of for a smaller snake if you've got a big retic that there's only a few manufacturers that make cages big enough for them. It is what it is. So that's a big piece of things. Without I threw out some names around some companies, but it's more just giving that info for somebody to take it and do the research and try to piece those things together and ask questions. I always see people asking white or black plastic, and they're like, "Oh, I like black because it's cleaner." But what they mean is it doesn't show that it's dirty. And I'm like, well, we should be caring about these animals and providing a clean environment for them.
Dude, I'm glad you
Well,
said it. I'm glad you
and
said
that's like seeing some of the old school gray and colored ones that from back in the early 2000s or 90s, and like you look inside and they're just trashed on the inside,
Yes.
and there's no way to get rid of it. And as someone who is like a clean freak, technically you can sanitize it within reason, and technically it can be clean surface wise, antigen wise, or bacteria wise, or whatever. But then it just looks absolutely horrible. And urates, especially on boas, are notoriously difficult if they're not cleaned quickly, which is difficult if you keep like a bedded substrate like aspen. You can't just see them all because sometimes they'll spot urate and then do like a big one, right? You'll get the big one, spot clean, whatever that area, put new aspen in. Next week, you'll go to the front, and then you're like, oh, there's another one. If you don't get on it quick, that stuff is hard to get out. If you have a surface that absorbs it and then causes permanent staining, as a keeper, man, I would lose my damn mind. I couldn't. I'm so anal about it. Like I couldn't stand not being able to get rid of it.
That's a big plus for high density polyethylene is nothing sticks to it. Polypropylene is choice number two, and then the polystyrene is choice number three. PVC is the hardest one to clean or
Yeah.
ABS, and that I mean Thomas and I have very similar regimens on cleaning. I think the primary difference is I use F10, he uses chlorhexidine,
Right.
but we both
I use spit.
we both
Spit
use those.
shines 'em.
We both use those cleaners. Spray. I spray in F10, let it soak, do its thing. I'll wipe it out, and I'll do a wipe over with everything. I wipe over
Let's
it with
talk
everything.
about that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that real quick, Chris. Sorry to interrupt you. How you let it soak, and Carlos, being in the medical profession, the time of effectiveness. This is something that a lot of people don't understand when you're talking pathogenic microorganisms. The time
Right.
of effectiveness is the amount of time that needs to be allotted for a chemical or cleaner to have an effective negating ability for these organisms, right? So if you spray it on there and you immediately wipe it off, you have manually, it's almost like hand washing, manually removed whatever pathogen or microorganism or material that you're trying to get off. But you're not effectively sanitizing the surface because you're not allowing enough time for that cleaner to be effective. And so I think as new keepers, they also need to understand that just because you spray and wipe doesn't mean that it's necessarily sanitized. Allowing it the ability to soak and become effective against the pathogens or microorganisms is a super important aspect too that people need to really pay attention to.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like F10, at a 250 to 1 concentration, it's got a 15-minute timeline that it has to sit there. So it's not going to all evaporate, but you've got to let it sit. So, you've got a couple of tubs, or even if you just got one, spray it down, let it sit there, do its thing. So I do that for the initial. Then I'll just, if I need to spray more, I'll spray it again just to wipe it out. If there's, I'm using cocoa and it's kind of a dusty substrate, so wiping out any excess or just to go over the outside of the tub, I'll wipe it down with a Lysol wipe. Now, after I do that, then I'm going to go through and F10 it again. Now, this is your spray it and wipe it, but that's just to make sure it's visually spotless. And then the final step that I do is, which is a thing that I got from Tom, is I will steam clean it also. So now steam, that last step under that high heat is going to kill anything else and make sure that it's spotless. Plus, you're steaming it with distilled water. There's no spots. It's nice and clean. If I'm, say I am upgrading an animal from a baby rec to a juvenile, or from juvenile to an adult enclosure, or I sold one and now this enclosure is going to use something else, it's important, the ARS and Freedom Breeder Recs I use have the plastic panels to pull out, disinfect those. I'm steam cleaning the tracks, make sure that everything is completely sterile so there's zero cross-contamination between animals. Because it's another thing that we're missing. You can do all the right things with quarantine. You can do all the right things with your husbandry and care, but there might be something that this animal has that you don't know, and it could live with it, but then now another animal gets exposed to it and the other animal's dead.
Right. So, besides the cleaning items, one of the other things that I know you're pretty passionate about is the proper utilization of thermostats. within each rack. So talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So that, like many things, goes back to my original keeping of localities. So whenever I first started, I have a stack of 5 cages, and I have a Sonoran Boa in one, I have a Costa Rican Boa in one, I have a Nicaraguan Boa in one, I have a Bolivian Boa in one, and I have a Colombian Boa in one. Those all have different temperature requirements. Those all might be different ages. I might be breeding one, not the other. I might have 2 breeding, and one ovulates before the other. All those things that I just presented, it's impossible to provide accurately for your animal without having independent controls on each one of those cages. If I had a single thermostat on everything and I was cooling for breeding, well, now say you had 5 animals in a stack of cages, now your other 3 that aren't breeding are going to be cooled. Might be okay to cycle them. They might be adults that you want to cycle anyway, or that cooling temperature might be the wrong temperature for them. For example, Sonoran Boas that I spoke to earlier, they have to be kept cooler to get them to breed. A very well-known breeder, whenever it was making double hets for a double homozygous leopard crossed to a Colombian boamorph, lost his Colombian male whenever he did that, because the temperature had to be so cold to get the leopard to be receptive that it gave the Colombian a respiratory infection. So, if I have a small collection and I have those different animals, I need to have those separate thermostats so I can say, okay, well, this female ovulated in January, she's going to need the heat cranked back up to give her a 90-degree hotspot. This female, they're still breeding. I still want to have that 10-degree night trap at night, so I don't want to do that yet. Have that separate thermostat, it saves you. The next point was based off of just energy usage and then with it, fire safety. So if you have a thermostat, it's a mechanical device. If it fails, what's at risk? If one thermostat is controlling one cage and one thermostat fails, there's one animal that's potentially at risk. If one thermostat is controlling a 30-bin CB70 rack and it fails, there are 30 animals at risk.
And we know of people who have, even of recent times, had issues to where if they had run a series like how Chris does, they would not have lost 20 or 30 animals from one faulty setup. And when you look at the cumulative cost of running a per level thermostat, yes, there is a cost associated. If you have, 15 levels on a Freedom Breeder 1575, technically that's 15 ports that you would need to have individual setups on, right? But if you only have one and you cook 15 levels of 75 total animals, how much would that have actually cost you?
Well, I'm somebody that got directly affected by that, because I actually had a thermostat from a well-known manufacturer have a probe issue, and it ended up cooking a couple of animals in a level. So now what I've had to do is I've actually had to build some redundancy into those systems to prevent that from ever happening again. And I ended up losing. Honestly, had I spent the money on multiple thermostats per rack, which is what I currently have now, right? Had I spent that initially, I would have saved myself a $30,000 loss, which is essentially what the males that ended up getting cooked in those levels ended up costing me,
Right. And then down the line, you would have saved their ability to breed and produce.
Oh, dude, I don't even want to think about how much potential I had lost just in those males with their reproductive ability,
Yeah. So like right now, I'm running 92 different thermostat probes through all of my stuff.
Wow.
And that was less than 8.
I got 93.
It's less than $8,000 for all those thermostats. And you look at a collection that's worth, $500,000. It's worth an $8,000 investment to take care of it.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, even if you're not looking at it from that standpoint, so Tom was mentioning, 15 on a baby rack. I recently put a post up on Instagram showing the side of one of my baby racks with a bunch of Herpstead EZ2s zip tied to it. And so I have 7 thermostats on there. Each thermostat has 2 probes, 1 probe per level. Those thermostats are $120 a piece. That means $60 per line. So that was a 3-wide baby rack, not one of the 5 wides. So that works out to $20 per tub. If you're telling me that your baby isn't worth a $20 investment to keep it safely and accurately, then I don't want you touching animals. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, you probably shouldn't even be keeping.
Yeah.
I don't want to sound like a Nazi on this, because a lot of people are like, it's nice to do, but it's excessive. you know what, you may view it as excessive. I think it's a worthwhile cost. Again, like I said at the beginning, there's different ways to do things. It's not the only way. Can you keep them with one? Sure. But given the risks associated, given how things work, I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. But
no, I think you're absolutely right, man, because I'll tell you what, one of the things that I think sometimes may be misconstrued by people that may listen to the show is thinking that although we talk a lot about the business side, you know what I mean? These animals are animals and they're our pets, right? And we have a inherent responsibility to keep them safe and keep them protected, right? So when you lose animals, it's not that you're just losing potential profits. You're losing living things that, matter to you. Like I'm not even gonna lie. When I lost those males, dude, I literally fell to my knees and I cried. And the money was the last thing on my mind at that moment.
It was the animals.
Look, that one baby wreck right now. So I've got rough-scaled sand boas, Kenyan sand boas, the Russian sand boas. I've got Colombian rainbow boa, some boa constrictors, and water pythons in there. They also don't all have the same temperature requirements.
Correct.
So I need to be able to have those separate lines so I can give them that separate temperature. I mean, that's so. Given bulk of the reasons there, but I think with it's also I've proven it to myself with my breeding success. Especially with the leopards early on, people weren't getting them to breed, and one of the issues was the temperatures. And after I shared this little secret to so many people, they were able to get their leopards to breed.
Yeah.
It's just, hey, now you can control that girl at a lower temp than the one above her that's a different locality.
Now, let me ask you something. Do you keep any sort of ambient room temperature as a baseline?
Yes.
Okay.
But it's fairly low.
Got it.
I have,
It's 69.
I have it's 72 is my minimum baseline. My room temperature is usually about 75, but I have a secondary heating system that kicks on at 72.
Yeah, same.
And that one is controlled by a Wi-Fi thermostat that's tied into my smart home system. So I can pull up my phone whenever I'm in Tinley at a show and check the room temperature and make sure everything's all good and kosher.
Yeah, I'm with you too, man. I actually ended up doing that about 3 years ago, man, and it gives me so much peace of mind when I'm away from my house, that I can check my temperature remotely, and I can check obviously my humidity remotely too. You know what I mean?
So with these topics, I do want to talk about differences of some of the thermostats that people aren't really aware of too. So the primary things we have on-off thermostats and proportional thermostats. On-off thermostats are working off a mechanical relay. That's a switch, just like your light switch. Goes on, goes off. Things are only designed to go on and off so many times. Now, that so many times may be millions. Some of those might be 1,000. Cheaper thermostats are cheaper for a reason. They're going to fail sooner. It's just how the parts are made. So you can get good thermostats that are on-off that are much safer than a cheap one. That on-off piece, that mechanical relay, over time, as those components wear out, that can arc. That arc can weld that switch open. And that's where you have a full current blast that ends up cooking animals. I think almost every modern reptile keeper that's using belly heat or radiant heat panels or ceramic heat emitters, the heating devices that are attached to their cages or racks have the ability to reach temperatures well in excess of what they need and easily can kill the animal.
Absolutely.
And if that thermostat's failure becomes on, you're done for.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
With that, you also have the fire risk. So that's my application for proportional. Now, I've used the old Helix thermostats. I've used Herpstat, EcoZone Vivarium, which is no longer a business, and Freedom Breeder thermostats. I've used them all used them all currently. They all have pluses and minuses and additional features. I know the most about Herpstats, but again, just sharing those other ones, that they're certainly not the only one out there. The Herpstats, they use a solid state component called a triac to regulate the current, and if that triac fails, there is a mechanical relay in there that'll switch off. But so again, we're saying, well, hey, that mechanical relay, you said, was the cheaper component, so why would I want that as a backup? Well, again, it was a bad component because it can only switch on and off so many times. If its job is to switch off one time as a shutoff, it's going to do its job. So if a triac fails, which I've never had one fail in any of my Herpstats, and I've been using them since 2004, then that would come into play. The other aspect with proportional thermostats, you have two different types. You have dimming and pulse proportional. Now, if you pull up a manual for Herpstat, which I was actually going through a new one today, it lists right in there, dimming is recommended unless you have metal racks, then to use pulse, but not to use pulse on plastic racks or plastic caging. The pulse proportional is essentially doing a quick on-off. I don't know beyond that exactly how it's working in the component piece of it, but the dimming proportional is regulating the current going to the device, and that's what I use and personally recommend. So now the negative is using dimming setting on a Herpstat on a metal rack. Those heat panels will often buzz. I don't have the electrical knowledge to explain why. There's an audible hum to the heat panel. I remember reaching out to Dion at Spider Robotics one time and asking why. I don't recall the reason, but essentially there was no danger there. It was just, that's the thing that happens, and you can either deal with it or you can switch it to pulse. In my use with dimming, so I'll set up a heat panel, put the probe on it, turn it on. It needs to get to 92 to reach a 90-degree hotspot in the tub. Perfect. I'm looking at the thermostat, and it says it needs 20% power to reach that 90-degree temperature. Perfect. That means that there's no reason for it to ever go above 50%. So instead of having the ability for that thermostat to kick up to 100%, I can go in there. I know this is a feature on the 4 and the 6. I don't know about the other models because I don't use them. And the new Wi-Fi Herpstat 2, they have a max power setting. So I can go in there and say, this line can never go above 50%. Now, in the case of a power outage, everything's kicking on at once. The full power delivery, it's only going to get 50% power. That's doing a couple of things. One, it's safer for the animal because you're getting that ramp up and smoother temperature. The bigger thing, though, is two components. One, on the heat panel itself, and two, just from the electric surge and safety of your house. So if that's only pulling 50% power, that's obviously a lot safer than having a bunch of things pulling twice as much power and potentially overloading circuits and blowing fuses and causing other issues. The other aspect, all of the heat elements that we use are resistive-based heaters. Resistors over lengths of distance get weaker. There's inconsistencies in them, as well at full current delivery, they are going to fail sooner. So by using dimming thermostats, you're also prolonging the life of that heating element. By using separate probes, you're getting more accurate temperatures because even if you have the same heat panel on every level of a 30-bin CB70 rack, there are actually going to be differences in how that heat is delivering power. And if you don't have that separate probe, you're not going to account for those little minute differences. Now, they might be small. It might be an aspect of, well, this panel here, there's a spot over here where that's, I run the temp gun across and it's going to be, 71.5 and this one's 72 over here. But, when you go further, now you're going to find like this spot over here is only 88. So the other aspect with all that and coming with the 50% thing is just one thing that I've been meaning to do a write-up on. And again, I'm not an electrician, but, knowing some of this knowledge is beneficial is people need to understand how to deal with the power loads that they're setting up. So you get the right cages, you get quality heat elements, you get quality thermostats, but you can still overload circuits and create a fire hazard. And, so basic math, voltage times amperage equals wattage. So whether you have a 15 amp or 20 amp circuit in your house, calculate how much wattage that can support and make sure that your heat panels, the sum total at full power isn't going to exceed them. And then with that, so in my circumstance, what I always do as a safety thing that I've talked to some electricians on is, so on a line without doing the math in front of me, there's X amount of wattage that a 15 amp circuit can hold. I'm going to set a cap for 80% of that. So that means I'm going to go to ARS and Freedom Breeder, ask them how much wattage is in each of these heat panels. I'm going to add them all together and say, okay, if they were plugged into the wall straight, how much is this going to add up to? I'm going to make sure that I'm not using more than 80% of the power supply for that power line. And then after that, I'm going to put a thermostat on it with a 50% limiter. So really, at full blast, I have everything kicking on at once and full power draw, I'm not actually drawing more than 40%, and I'm not at risk of blowing any fuses and things shorting out and fire.
Hey, Thomas, do you use any sort of limiter? Up. Hold on,
I think talking to him in the past, like he has a number of dedicated lines and has an overabundance of electric supply for his facility.
Okay, got it. Okay, so any other tips and tricks you would provide somebody who is kind of getting ready to upgrade their equipment or really is looking for some direction? Maybe what do you feel is the most important thing?
Providing for the animal's needs. You got to make sure that you have enough space in there that okay, actually, you know what? There's a big one. Ventilation.
Ooh, that's actually a really good one.
Air circulation.
Yeah. People all the time, okay, so you have the people who say, oh, I got an aquarium. Oh, you can fix it by covering up the vent holes. As soon as you did that, you've created a terrible environment. You need to have air circulation to avoid respiratory issues. And people that are creating high humidity through air stagnation are creating a breeding ground for bacteria.
Yes, sir.
I think both of you guys can comment from that from a much more, medical background than I can. And I said the number one thing to look at is that if you do a substrate change and you're putting in wet cocoa and there's condensation on the tub for a day, that's one thing. But if on a regular basis you go down and there's condensation on the windows of your cage or the sides of your tub, you don't have enough ventilation.
Yep. I think that's a really great rule of thumb that people can start utilizing right there.
And another cool thing that couples with that is if you place your fans appropriately as well, you reduce the amount of ambient difference between high and low. So that's another thing that couples in with Chris's thermostat setup is as hot air rises, closure's higher, typically warmer. But like in my facility, I have 4 industrial 20-inch fans that blow directly down, circulating the air down. Then I run 3 Germ Guardians, 3 humidifiers, and also a 8-inch carbon recirc filter, like what they use for like grow ops, with a recycled carbon on the inside.
Yeah.
And coupled with that amount of airflow, you can really level out your temperatures from the low end of the cage, the bottom rack level, to the top. And I mean, I'm almost 7.5 feet high on my highest level. And if I take like I have Taylor hydrometer and thermostat sensors placed all around my room so I can get various readings from all locations. If I take one and put it on the top of the rack and I put one on the very bottom of the rack, let it sit so it levels out to whatever the current temperature is, I have less than a 1 degree change over that 7.5 foot distance from top to bottom. But the majority of that is because of the amount of airflow that I'm pushing down. And then that just creates new airflow, and pulls moisture out of the enclosures, because I run an air conditioner too, which kicks a lot of humidity out of my facility, which is why I need so many humidifiers to begin with. So.
Is there a specific humidifier you guys recommend?
I personally like Wix. Yeah,
it was the Wix, but what was that brand?
It's Airwick. Airwick is the brand. I have 2 different models that I use. There's one that is like a tub model, or it's like a bottle model. Yeah, well, it's a bottle model where there's two 2.5 gallon bottles that you fill up and you set it in, and it's a wick filter off the back, and it has like 9 different settings for the speed, and then you can set your humidity at whatever you want up to 65. 65 is like a constant run, because in most environments you'll never hit 65. But even if my facility is running at like 78 or 80%, it never turns off. The other one I use it's still the same manufacturer, but it's more of like a corner model. It's in the shape of a triangle, and we put it in the corner and turn them on, and we adjust, of course, as we need different humidities and things.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm certainly doing with my room, because again, I'm using a room in my house just like most keepers are. I don't have a dedicated built facility,
Yep.
and with that, I have to deal with the ceiling heights and the capacities of the room. While it's well insulated, I don't have that separate heating source. I don't have the ability to have ceiling fans, so I've had an issue with air circulation throughout the room, and as far as equalizing temperatures. So my use of different thermostats kind of makes up for that. I'll run temp guns on throughout the room, and at the extremes, find an 8-degree difference in the room. So, that's certainly a consideration people need to look at of, how the air is circulating in the room for equalizing temperatures, just for what they're providing for the animals. So, you have one cage in this location, another that's identical in another location, separate controls. They still might provide a different microclimate for the animals inside them.
Got it. So let's pivot real quick. I want to talk about your work with the leopard and the blood genes. So give us a little bit of background about the leopard and blood gene and kind of what attracted you to those.
Okay, so I mentioned this early on that the original attraction for the blood boa, that was going through the boa constrictor manual, seeing a picture of one of Ron St. Pierre's bloods. You got a tight circle back pattern, nice even color, and it's just a red boa. I mean, who can't like that, right? And unfortunately, finding animals that look like the animal in that book, which plenty of us have that book, and anybody else can go buy it cheaply. It doesn't exist. You can't find that kind of blood boa anymore. And looking at that, I liked the small boas. I had a tiny Nicaraguan boa that had that same circleback pattern, and I was just hooked on it. I've always looked at this kind of the chemistry of mutations and knowing like what's going on. So, you've got the main things you have in reptiles. You've got erythrophores, which can handle red pigment. You have xanthophores, which are yellow. Melanophores are black. Iridophores control iridescence, and chromatophores are what kind of pulls everything together.
Right.
So these are all classified as chromatophores. So like a example, so like an albino, which is technically, one definition is just something missing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's missing black. But what we typically think of as albino. So we have true amelanistic, like cal albino. It's missing melanin entirely, no ability to produce it, synthesize it, anything else. But then, and everybody's familiar with anerythristic, missing red, or hypomelanistic, less black. But it's just trying to figure out, okay, what's actually going on here that's creating this phenotype? Because once you can understand that, then you can understand how it pieces in and works with everything else. So my original attraction for the blood was to try to figure out, is this hyper-erythristic? Is it just erythristic, like you would say melanistic?
Right.
Is it, maybe it's axanthic and, you're just removing the yellow. There's not actually an increase of red, you're just taking something else away. Trying to figure that out and what's going on there. And that curiosity is what attracted me to that mutation. Some of the history on the morph itself. So the morph originated from Boas from El Salvador. Ron St. Pierre was the one that had brought those in and worked with the mutation originally. The mutation took 3 different primary tangents. So you had each person that did these started off with a pure El Salvador. So you had Rich Eiley of Salmon Boa take a pure El Salvador blood, bred it to one of his salmons to make salmon het bloods. And then the bloody salmon derives from there. And most of the sun dragon, red dragon, fire opals, every Colombian-based blood project is primarily from those lines. Then you had Bill Kirby take one of his pure El Salvador bloods and breed it to the Hog Islands. That's the project that I've continued, and Kevin Blumenthal continued, and then a few other breeders since then. Then you also had the berry bloods. Now, this was one that ends up with constant issues today, as people think this is a different mutation. It's not. It's the exact same mutation. John Berry. So there's 2 John Berrys in the reptile world. One here in the U.S. breeds Malagasy boas and some other species. The other one was from and moved back to the U.K. was breeding boamorphs and ball python morphs. The latter had a super awesome pure El Salvador blood, bred it to an import boa, which at the time he was under the impression that it was from Costa Rica, and you can find old posts on King Snake saying as much. And the female was really orange, and he was hoping to produce brighter, lighter colored bloods. And he produced those via hets. Well, whenever he bred those together, that import female ended up being het blood, and he produced bloods. Through some work, given the fact that I was working with the Costa Ricans at the time, it was later discovered that animal was actually a Nicaraguan boa. So making the berry bloods 50% Nicaraguan, 50% El Salvador initially. And the funny thing was, they've gotten this history of being known for being really red. Yet, if you look at those old kingsnake.com boa forum posts, he mentions how they're the orange bloods compared to the pure El Salvador bloods that he produced that year as well. So you had those three primary projects, the berries, the hogs, and then the bloody salmon derivatives. And everything that we see today is primarily off of those. The only breeder that I know of right now working with pure El Salvador blood still was Scott Rass. He had acquired stuff from Kelly and Neville James. They and the Barkers were the last ones to breed pure El Salvador bloods that I'm aware of after Ron St. Pierre. Now, separately and similar to John Barry's import that proved het, at one point, Bob McPhee had produced a unexpected blood boa in captivity that was two Nicaraguan boas and was pure Nicaraguan. That animal did not end up reproducing and had died as an adult. I don't know the full history there. The other, I want to say maybe it was 2015, maybe a little bit later, Vin Russo was breeding some of his high red Nicaraguan boas and paired two together and unexpectedly produced bloods. And I know he's working on producing some right now. So there are pure Nicaraguan boas that are blood boas. But other than the stuff from Vin on that particular project only, which he hasn't sold any either. So anything from Vin are the derivatives from the El Salvador stuff from Ron St. Pierre's line. You just have to look at what things have been done. So they've been crossed with orange tail hypo. People have bred them into Sonoran hypo, salmon hypos. With the salmon project, those have gone into everything on the Colombian side: Motleys, jungles, arabesques, Cal, Sharp, VPI, Boam, and Carmel, you name it. And so they've really kind of done everything and anything that you can with the mutation. One aspect as well with the original bloods is they were het type 2 anery. So routinely you'll see things pop up, and over the years, none of my animals were acquired as known hets, but I knew, again, with each of those pure founding stock that I'd traced everything back to, those were hets or expected hets. And I have a few times now produced type 2 aneries, type 2 ghosts. I actually had a super jungle pewter born in one litter. So things that were very much unexpected, because that anery pops up and rears its head every so often.
Yeah. Well, so I don't think you guys saw yet. Sorry, I just got back. But Bob McPhee, he just dropped a litter with unknown hets.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. So it was here. Let me read it. I have it right here. So it's from a RLT Motley het blood times hypo RLT het blood. That he was breeding, right? So he was going for the super RLT Motley bloods and the hypo versions, and the call albino stuff popped out. So he hit the sun dragon.
What the heck?
Yeah. So he
that's been
legit,
that RLT's been carrying that albino gene the whole time. It's a good thing he didn't start a Sharp project with it.
Yeah, right. Because then who the hell knows what would happen? But yeah, it looks like he hit like a visual super RLT sun dragon, maybe. I don't know.
Well, I think that's one thing too, that people not knowing history of morphs don't realize these hidden genes. Like all the original Sharp stuff, the original Sharp albino, Sharp stock was never produced by Brian Sharp. Brian started working with Calstrain that he bought hets from Pete, and bred those into Suriname Boas and was doing 50% Suriname stuff that was Cal albino. His original Sharp female, I don't remember if he did this, or I think he did the pairing, but then subsequently sold it. So he had bred it to the one of the hets from Pete and got a bunch of normal hets. So all of the original het Sharps were 50% het count. And we've, there was a post in one of the Boa groups the other day. Somebody bred a Paradise or a Paradigm or a Paraglow or one of those para combos.
Paradise Glow.
To a Sharp Sunglow Jungle, so they thought, and got a bunch of normals, because that Sharp wasn't actually Sharp, it was a Cal. Now, there's two sides of that. There could be something with somebody being dishonest. I'm going to assume it's not. I'm going to I don't know who originally produced it or the history of it, and the breeder didn't, ended up taking on the post, but Knowing that all the sharp stuff has the cal gene in there, you could easily produce an albino that was cal and you didn't know it.
Well, that's the
And
same thing with IMGs too.
right,
All the original
all
IMGs were het call
het call and
and
het anery because
het
they
anery. Yep.
right. So people are looking at things like, so one of the combos that I've wanted to do for years with the bloods is I want to do an IMG blood project, and my IMGs are het RDR. Well, I can't do that because if my blood ends up being het type 2, and later on throughout this, everything, so an IMG that's possible, that is het RDR, so my babies are just going to be possible het RDR, they're possible het type 2. If I produce something that's anery in that, I'm not going to necessarily know what it is because
you can't say
what is a
anery
pewter?
is.
A pewter is essentially a black-eyed anery. That's how you tell it from a regular type 2 anery in that litter, is the eyes. A black-eyed anery, well, is it a black-eyed anery from that litter, or was it a blood and it's a pewter? Or is it a black-eyed anery pewter? There's no way to know.
Yeah.
So I don't want to do that because
convoluted.
that combination can't be identified. So crossing those animals doesn't make any sense. Now, if I breed my IMG that's het RDR, breed it to something else, make some other IMGs, then breed one of those to another RDR anery, prove that it's not het, then I could introduce it to the bloods. But otherwise, I'm going to have to acquire an animal from somewhere else.
So, talk to me a little bit about the use of kind of the blood gene and the leopard gene in Europe versus what is or hasn't been done in the U.S. yet.
There's not a whole lot more with blood stuff being done over there than is here that I'm aware of. On the leopard front, so leopard has a very interesting history. So leopards were first identified as a morph called Mephisto, the breeder of which I don't know, but it was in Germany. Then you had Hans Werner produce his, named it leopard. That's what everybody's familiar with. Then at another time, you had another boa that was, now keep in mind as well that while leopards are allegedly Sonoran, there's no proof that they are Sonoran. You had another breeder in Germany years later produce a boa that they dubbed the Black Pearl, allegedly from Costa Rican stock. Now, while I couldn't trace that with exports out of Costa Rica at the time, phenotypically, they were very similar, the original parents, to the Liberia Costa Ricans that I had, so I fully believe that those were Costa Rican. Then you had in Honduran Boas in 2008 another one pop up that was dubbed Superonyx. So that one was treated as incomplete dominant. All the others were treated as recessive. Very similar phenotypes, and the breeders that worked with those assert through to no end that they're a separate mutation. I think some of that has come down to a language barrier. As I've even spoken to some of those people, and I said, the definition of same and how they're treating it. But the aspect that I look at is, and this goes in just morph breeding in general. So you have true mutations, which are caused by a mutant allele. If that allele is the same mutant allele, then that mutation is the same. If you have variances within that mutation because of the locality that it's from, and its pattern, its color, we can see that in leopards based off of if they've been bred to Nicaraguan, Panamanian, Colombian, etc. The pattern density, the colors that come out from it all change based on its locality lineage, and so that same thing is going on with the leopards over there. I'm working on the same things. I guess I'm not feeding my stuff enough because I produced my first leopards in 2008. The first Superonyx were produced in 2008, and they've already made like 12 different multi-recessive combos with bloods, positives, aneries, motleys, hypos, everything under the sun. So
hell, they've even started getting VPI into it.
Right. So yeah, there's a whole lot of things, and that's another thing too. Is like I always say, just in general with breeding, you need to pick the right animals to start. You don't just pair a VPI and a leopard. You find the leopard that has the pattern you want. You find the VPI that has the color and traits you want, and you breed them accordingly. Now your goal might be like my preference on leopards is that marbled pattern. So I'm going to want to pick a VPI that it's got thick widow's peak saddles and a lot of high pattern density, like some of the original VPIs. Somebody else might prefer a leopard that has the spots coming on its back and want the red colors out of its base. So there, you're going to want a leopard that already has some Colombian in it and probably exhibits those traits to start with.
Hey
And it
guys.
just depends on what your goals are there. And Tom and I like different types of leopards, so I always give him crap with his stuff. I said that he's doing the wrong things, and
He always gives me shit.
it's personal preference because that's
Yeah.
the look that he wants, and that's what everybody's breeding for, right? We're not just hopefully, we're not just stacking things just to stack things, but we all know.
Yeah,
that
well,
there's breeders
what
that do
I
that.
always tell people is keep and produce and breed what you enjoy too. You don't have to fit anybody's mold. Just do what you want to do and what makes you happy. I think where people really fall short is they kind of get caught up in the game of competition and such, and so they start doing things that they're not passionate for, or they don't prefer over others because other people are doing it, right? They're just kind of following the pack. But it's like, break free from that and just make what you like. So, Chris's version of what he considers a pinnacle leopard, I think is absolutely beautiful. And I would love to see it in a VPI. Unfortunately, I don't have any that can do that for me, but I do have something else that is already Colombian based and has more of that reduced pattern, but, high color on the background. So
I also
kind
don't think what I like in a leopard could actually exist in a VPI.
Yeah. Just, I mean, the morphs themselves would
Right.
just clash
Like,
and kind of negate its capability.
Yeah, I think unless you took a VPI first and say like bred that to like, this is going to sound blasphemous, but I'll explain it. Take a VPI, breed it to a Tarahumara boa. That's the highest saddle count pattern density that I can think of. You then keep the hets that look most like the Tarahumara, make your visual VPI there, and then breed that back to that marbled leopard. Then you might be able to do it.
Yeah,
Just
because you're keeping that
saddle
pattern
count
density.
saddle
Right.
count on a Colombian, you're not going to have it. It's gonna separate that pattern and take other controls on.
Well, I'll tell you, for example, one of the things that I'm doing. So I'm currently breeding BPI to leopard stock, but much like you guys said earlier, there was a specific look and type of leopard that I wanted
Right.
to try to find with my. One of the things that I went heavy in was a lot of the orange belly leopards, right? So with that pattern, it took me a while to find the right leopard to fit that project. And the only reason that I'm doing that is because much like that habanero boa that was produced in Europe about a month and a half ago, okay, I want to essentially create some sort of color pigmentation enrichment on the belly area because that's one of the areas that we really don't see anything being done with the VPI line, right? And it's just something that I want to see for myself. I'm essentially producing what I want for me.
And that's a color trait that is common from Honduran boas and from the original leopards is
Right.
those red bellies. So those are those other aspects that again things that you want to put into your projects. You have to figure out where do they come from. So how do I get them? Because
Right.
you can't. They're just not going to materialize out of thin air.
Yeah, exactly. It's not the type
Well,
of
to
leopard
some
you're gonna
people
be
they
able to
will.
pick up there. Yeah.
Allegedly, it's amazing how some people just have certain things just pop out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's just it's like chronic, like six a month or something.
Like five new mutations out of a single locality that was imported one time.
Yep. So what's your number one kind of plan for each one of these genes for the immediate future?
I'm combining them.
There
So
you go.
honestly, they're my favorite. So I want to just put them together. That's it. The first. So every single project that I've started, I have not been the first to combine those base mutations, but in many times I have hit the end result sooner, and oftentimes, not to be an ego maniac, but I look at my example versus somebody else's, and I like the phenotype that I've produced better.
Right.
The blood leopard stuff, double hets were produced 2 years before I made my hets, but I didn't like the individual animals chosen to make those hets, and it came down to not only the individual phenotype of the parents, it came down to the locality blend, and it came down to the introduction of hypo from the start. Now, when I started the blood leopard project, I also went into it assuming it was going to be a terrible project. So, motley bloods. Some of the original ones have matured to be black snakes. A lot of motley bloods, you can only tell their blood by looking at the eyes. They're just so dark. The motley impact on color just really throws off the blood, and they lose being a red boa. My assumption was based on the depth of dark pigment with the leopards that it was going to do the same thing. Now, there become a problem, just like we were talking before about RDR mixed in with type 2 anery in blood and picking out, oh, is this a black-eyed anery or is this a pewter? If I have a blood leopard and the leopard is dominating the color, am I going to be able to tell that it's a blood? So I, again, with like all the other times that I've mentioned it, I started off with as pure of each side as I could. So I picked the lightest color hog blood that I could and bred that to a leopard, figuring, okay, I'm adding the hog genes in, but I'm still keeping out the Panamanian and Colombian. The key on there was both of those impact the pattern in a way that I don't like. So I still want to be able to produce marbled leopards, but I want to, if the hog gene might be enough to lighten them so I can see what's going on. Well, with that project, I actually unlocked a new project, which is just, again, it for lack of a better name, I've just termed it the Gilbert T positive. So this gene is tracing the lineage. It's got to be from the Hog Island side of the blood, and it's a gene that exists out there already. The desert is allegedly also Hog Island. So if that was it, that may very well be the same gene. Don't know right now until that would be done. I unfortunately don't have any desert stock, and I'm not selling any of my T positives right now, although unbeknownst to me, I have actually been selling them for years. I kept a couple bloods in 2011 that I thought might be T positive, and subsequently each year as well. I produced some more hog bloods in 2018, kept one back that appears T positive, but then 2019, with the breeding of the double het blood leopards together, I produced the standalone T positive gene and proved without a doubt that it was a separate mutation there. Yeah. So it was isolated. So one of the leopards that I produced last year looks like it might be this T positive form. The other one I think might be blood. I won't know until I breed those to respective things. So, take a leopard that's possibly a blood. I'll just breed it to an unrelated blood boa. If I get a full litter of bloods, then it was a blood. If I don't, then it wasn't. That's how I'll know. But, comparing that animal to leopards that I've produced in my own lineages, I feel confident that it is a combo, but just like I expected, it's not a radical difference. But I with the genes that I've put together there, I really like the outcomes. I think the leopards were really cool. The bloods that were really cool out of those litters, so I'm going to continue working with that, and that's been my primary focus.
Well, I'm stoked to hear that you're potentially working with the Desert T+. That's one that I've actually been working with for a while because it was originated out of Arizona. Right? So I'm still hitting that pretty hard, and I got some super secret stuff.
If you've seen those as babies, take a look at my babies and compare them with their het siblings, and see if that's got the same kind of color spectrum as well. Obviously, mine are going to be a little bit wacky because they're 50% Sonoran, 25% El Salvador, and 25% Hog Island. So,
well, one of the things that I've noticed, and one of the things that I've kind of postulated with the Desert T+ stuff, not to get too heavy into this one, is that the babies definitely have our hats definitely have a distinct look to them. Okay, I don't know if that is the potential involvement of the Hog Island stuff, as you alluded to, right?
I would guess,
but there's like a cleanliness to them,
right?
That's
I would guess that's the hog traits, and that's one thing. Whenever I was breeding het to het with the blood stuff before I just started primarily working with just blood to blood breedings, on the 50% hog stuff, I would produce a lot of animals that would look Hog Island. Now, I also realized that they may well have just actually been T positive.
Right.
There's some complexities there. But I think that's one thing, too, is, a lot of people, when they do these crosses, or especially whenever they don't know the lineage of animals, they'll see a trait pop up, and they'll think it's a new morph. And it's not. It's just part of that gene. You have missing things that are missing saddles or have thin saddles, propensity for reverse striping, pattern aberrancies, saddle shape, size, color, number of saddles. All those things are, vary across different boa populations. And if you're not aware of those differences, when you look at something, you're going to think it's a mutation, but it's not. And it's not to say that it's not reproducible. So it may still have a purpose, and you may still be able to use it and direct the look of the actual morphs you are breeding. But then people end up calling things a new morph that, again, isn't a single gene mutation.
Right. So let me ask you this. Being that more people are beginning to work with the leopard and the blood gene, and it's something, as you've alluded to, that has been kind of worked pretty hard in Europe, especially in like Germany, do you think these genes, both the leopard and the blood, are poised to be some of the key genes in the hobby in the future?
I think, given how extreme they are, they would have to be.
Yeah,
I agree. I think one thing that held it back was just the people that didn't want to do crosses. Or I think with the leopards in particular, early on, there were a lot of issues with them. Hans didn't outcross. There were, people were feeding him too much. They were keeping him too hot. They weren't, they were keeping him like a puppy mill Colombian boa breeder versus keeping them like a locality breeder. And that's one thing too, is a lot of those differences that I talk about with like my setups and cooling and temperatures that I use and the leopards and locality boa success in general, it works. But is it necessarily? Well, early on, yes. Later on, no. There's one of the guys that's very similar to some of the boa people we know, but in different species. Nick Mutton with his carpet pythons, right, doing pure carpet pythons. He's talked about this too on Morelia Python Radio, saying like, I cool and feed cycle, but then my customers are saying, oh, I don't do anything. I just pair them together and they breed. And he's like, yeah, because you have essentially domestic animals.
Right.
3 generations in captivity, they're going to be a lot easier to breed than these ones that are straight out of the wild or F1s. Yeah. So, I've had things where I tried to do and had I been successful on either of the 2 attempts. This is the only female boa ever that I've had that I couldn't get to breed. I tried breeding my leopard to a sharp albino to make double hets. And I was not willing to subject that sharp female to too low of temperatures because I was worried about killing her. And so I'm trying to, balance animals that have different breeding cues, and it never worked. And ultimately, she did die whenever the last breeding attempt, and she was, 10 years old at the time. And it's just, and I had mentioned that, without a name on it, the breeder that had lost a Colombian boa whenever they had taken a pure Colombian morph to a pure Sonoran leopard to try to do those initial crosses. So I think now that we have leopards that have Colombian genes or Nicaraguan genes or just diversity of bloodlines with whatever morph project or locality type animals you're looking at doing, they become a lot easier to breed.
Yep.
So I think that'll help with their popularity.
Yep. No, I'm with you, man. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break, and then when we come back, we're going to hit the Dirty Dozen.
The Dirty Dozen.
All right, everybody, welcome back. It's time for the Dirty Dozen. So, Chris, I'm going to ask you 12 questions. You give me 12 answers. They can be as short or as long as you want them to be, okay?
Sounds good.
Number 1, what is the size of your current collection?
So I actually had to count this because I knew this was coming from listening to the other podcasts. So I'm at 92 boas right now. Okay. And then I'm at 122 snakes total with the other species that I have.
Okay. Yeah, you're pretty much where I'm at right now. All right. Number 2.
I've been doing this longer than you.
Frozen thawed or live, and what's your bedding choice?
Frozen thawed. I start my babies off on frozen thawed. I feed live for a baby as a last resort, but I've had good luck, and actually I just started doing that the past 2 years. I used to start babies off on live hoppers and then switch them to frozen after 2 or 3 meals, but 2018, 2019 started everything off on frozen, and it's been good. Bedding choice, I use cocoa right now. I've also I'll keep some supply of I think it's Superior Shipping. They're Reptizorb liners. I'll keep some of those on standby. And I'll use sphagnum moss too for some snakes that need higher humidity.
Ooh, okay. Nice call, man. Number 3, what's your favorite morpher locality?
Nebulosa.
Yeah, it's his dream snake.
Yep.
Boa nebulosa from Dominica. There was one breeder that had them in the country years ago. I don't know of anybody with them now. I know somebody in Germany bred them, 5 or 6 years ago, the last time that I know of. Allegedly, there's one of the crazy weird boa species people that have managed to bring them into the U.S., but they have not come out publicly with it. And but I would trade my entire boa genus. So that's why specific, the boa constrictor stuff, Imperator, Sigma constrictor for Nebulosa if I had the opportunity.
For some reason, I thought Crutchfield had some.
I know he's posted pictures of them. You can easily find them if you go to Dominica. You just can't get them.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know if they're CITES 1. I don't believe so. I think Occidentalis is the only CITES 1 animal. But, yeah, they're super cool.
All right. Number 4. What is the most overrated morph or locality?
I hate this one because I feel like you're throwing people under the bus. What I'm going to say,
I didn't hesitate. What was the problem? I didn't even hesitate.
I'm going to say this, and I'll let people.
Okay, what's the one that appeals to you the least? I guess is the best way.
Well,
personally,
I'm going to answer it 2 parts. So one, I'll answer the aspect of how morph is construed. I hate the most overrated morphs are the morphs that aren't actually mutations.
Ooh.
People that are naming polygenic traits or wild type attributes from crossing different localities as a single gene mutation, they're calling them dominant or incomplete dominant, not understanding where that trait came from. Again, those things may be inheritable, but doesn't mean they're mutations. So my most overrated morph are the ones that aren't real morphs. But from an actual mutation standpoint, scoria. And it just comes down to it's a deficient mutation. The neurologic problems, people saying, oh, there's some that don't have it. Every mutation that is a mutation is impacting a protein in the animal, and clearly that one is impacting a protein that animal needs. Nick Mutton's done some talks on that with jaguar carpets and the ball python mutations that have neurological issues too, and I know he's spoken to the actual proteins involved with the development of the animals that are responsible, but I can't get behind it because it's just harming the animal.
All right, number 5. What's the most underrated morph or locality?
I'm going to put that as my favorite one, Nebulosa, because nobody knows about it. There was a post, not too long ago. People were asking like, "What's your favorite morph? What do you want?" And people are picking all these super high expensive mutations and combos and everything else. And a couple people put on some bloodlines of known things, but nobody put Nebulosa. And I think it just comes down to a lot of the audience out there that is active in social media is often newer and not familiar with things, and nobody just had ever heard of it. So I'd say that's definitely the most underrated.
Okay. All right, man. Number 6. What's your favorite part of the hobby?
Those individuals that are always looking to push it to the next level and to share information. I got started heavy into the boa world when I was 15. First time I went to Daytona and meeting some big breeders, and they had no idea how old I was because I communicated via emails, and they thought that I was older than I was. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't for their help and support, wouldn't have been able to accomplish anything. And seeing that kind of thing is alive and well is good. I'm always anxious to help people that are really looking to learn. Like you have the people that'll ask a question, but they just want an affirmation of the way they're doing things. And then you have the people that are really, curious to know histories of things and, why certain things are done, not just how to do it, but the reasons behind it. And those are the things that I like, always learning and advancing.
Nice. Number 7, what's the worst part of the hobby?
The ones that don't do that. So the people that, again, treat the ones that treat things as trade secrets. They don't want to tell you how to breed your boas because they don't want you to produce the same thing that they're working with. The ones that want to, talk down on people that because they can't afford some fancy new morph. You have crappy keepers that have expensive snakes, and you have gold star keepers that have low dollar value animals. And it's what we're providing for these animals and the proper care that's important, and sharing information so that they can benefit and we can benefit and the hobby can advance together. I think that's one thing that I think Europe is way ahead of us on and a lot of this comes down to different countries having standards on caging too. but they put a lot more effort into providing proper caging and equipment. Whereas here, we've still got people going to Petco, buying an aquarium with a screen lid and a heat rock for their new boa, and that there's no reason for that anymore.
Yep. All right, man. Number 8. So this one we're going to modify slightly, which is what other species are kept and why? Because you've already answered this, so I'm going to ask you this. What other non-boa species do you keep and why?
Okay, so the non-boa species, I have the only one that's part of a breeding project is Lyasis fuscus Australian water pythons. The other ones that are kept out of curiosity and for pets, I have a opal diamond ball python, which is a combination of phantom and russo.
Right.
I have a T-negative albino blood python. I have a carpondro that's 75% green tree, 12.5% diamond, 12.5% jungle, and then I have some scaleless Texas rat snakes.
Oh, cool.
The only colubrid that made their way in.
Yep. 9. What is a common misconception about you?
That I'm an arrogant asshole. I think
that's literally the exact same answer that I gave. I'm not shitting you.
Literally verbatim. Verbatim.
Because probably in the same aspect. I want to share accurate information, and I don't get on any groups or anything on social media to make people look bad. I get on there when something bad is being shared, and it sucks that needs to be said. I put a post. I think I made it. An announcement on one of the pages, like, essentially think before you speak. If the person writing should knows, or putting out a YouTube video knows if they know the information or not. If you don't know, don't say anything. That's it. Don't disseminate information that's just going to do harm to somebody. They're trying to take care of their animals properly, or look for that advice. And I think the way that I write, I essentially write for a living, and doing business writing and credit proposals and risk summaries and stuff for the bank. The way I write is very direct, very factual, and the lack of emotion that comes there can come off as condescending and demeaning.
All right. Number 10. What makes you say, what was I thinking when you look back at your time in the hobby?
Selling off all those weird, obscure species to just focus on boas and then having to go get them again. Like, had I kept breeding rough-scaled sand boas back when I did that, like, I'd have some really cool stuff by now. Right.
Yep.
It took me forever to find water pythons again.
Oh, yeah. Not easy.
They're not common. That's like all these things that you used to be able to go to a show. Now, granted, they're going to be from a flipper or whatever. But you used to be able to go to a show, like I could see a savu python for $100. I don't know the last time I saw a savu python.
Well, look at white-lipped pythons right now.
Right.
Like how their prices have just jumped through the roof these last couple of years. You used to be able to get those things for like $70 over here at like the Pomona show back in the early 2000s. All right. Number 11. What is one tip you would give to people looking to invest in boas and reptiles?
Invest in the person you're going to do business with. So in addition to like all the topics that I talked about on care and husbandry and the right equipment, look at how people are keeping their animals. Even the bad ones often show how bad their husbandry is. Mm-hmm. Support those that are taking that extra effort and doing the right thing, because one, obviously they're doing something right and they know how to do it, and they're usually more than willing to help you out as well. But the worst thing to get is as a keeper is somebody that asks for help for an animal that they bought from somebody else, that they could have got that same thing from you, but they went somewhere else for cheaper, and then when they have problems, they come to you. And you still want to help them because the animal welfare is the one that counts the most, but it's just and you gotta support the guys that are doing it right.
Absolutely, man. All right, final one, number 12. Any shout outs you want to give out?
Shout outs might be cliche to some, but they're going to be family to my parents and my cousin. Those are the ones that helped me out and supported me whenever I got started, and allowed things to happen. Parents helping me with the collection whenever I was in college. My cousin that pushed me back to arboreals and has been my sounding bar since I got started day one. So
awesome, man. Well, guys, that wraps it up for today. Chris, tell the people out there where they can see your animals and learn more about you.
Sure. So my only Facebook presence is personal, just Christopher Gilbert. Might be hard to find, but you'll see me on boa groups and posting things. But the easiest way to see stuff and anything that I post boa related is going to be on my Instagram, which is Gilbert_Boas, and then my website is gilbertboas.com.
All right, Tom, tell the people where they can find you.
I got it on Facebook and Instagram, both just under Boa Addicts. Facebook.com/Boa Addicts, and on Instagram, just search in Boa Addicts, and you'll see tons of cool pictures, I'm sure.
Awesome. And you guys can find me at morphs_unleashed on Instagram. All right, guys, thanks for listening. We are out. Guys, that was a great episode. Thanks to Chris Gilbert of Gilbert Boas for joining us today. Join us next time as we speak with Richard Albino of Da Vinci Boa. We're going to talk about his work with Central American morphs, along with tips on how to grow your boas the right way. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you guys tuning in. Do us a favor. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Play. Until next time, grow 'em slow.